In the shadows of forgotten chambers, where silence thickens into a presence and dust hangs in the air like breath held for centuries, there lies a machine. Not a ruin, not a relic, but a thing that continues. It rests in stillness, yet, when touched, it stirs faintly, its gears answering with reluctant grace. Bronze teeth, fitted with precision beyond what history remembers, whisper against one another, as if some ghost still turns them from within. No chronicle mentions its making, no inscription guides its use, no legend explains its birth. It is ancient, it is mechanical, it is alive in a way that unsettles the heart. And the strangest truth is this: it still works, though no one understands it. Consider that thought for a moment. Something older than empires, older perhaps than the languages we speak, still hums softly with life. What kind of mind conceived it? What kind of hands shaped its pieces, cut its wheels, aligned its teeth so perfectly that they remain true after centuries of silence? If we cannot build certainty around its story, then perhaps we must build wonder instead. For what else is left to us but are we when faced with survival so unlikely, endurance so complete? We begin with a question. What does it mean when a creation outlasts its creator? When hands turn to dust, when memory collapses, when empires fall but an object born of those forgotten hands persists. The world has many ruins, toppled pillars leaning against the weight of centuries, crumbled libraries reduced to ash and silence, temples scorched by fire and violence. But this is not a ruin. This is not the broken body of a culture. This is survival, without explanation. This is a whisper that refuses to fade, a heartbeat from an age that should no longer breathe. Some objects survive by accident, coins dropped and forgotten in the soil, tools buried in riverbeds, bones turned to stone by the slow alchemy of earth. But this machine feels deliberate, as though it was built not only to serve, but to endure. Its design resists decay. Its bronze teeth, carefully aligned, resist the bite of time itself. It is almost as if its makers intended for it to wait, to be found, to astonish those who would come centuries later. And if that was their intention, then they succeeded. For here we are standing in the silence of their absence, staring at their creation and wondering what it means. Tonight, as we drift into the rhythm of the story, we will walk through the corridors of lost knowledge. We will linger where history falters, where archaeology hesitates, where imagination fills the gaps. We will wander not in search of final answers, but in search of the echo of forgotten questions. This is not a tale with solutions. It is a tale with gears that turn softly, endlessly, in the dark. Imagine the moment of discovery. A lamp held high in a dust-choked chamber, shadows stretching like hands along the stone walls. The air, stale and heavy, carrying the taste of centuries untouched. At first, it would have seemed like any other ruin. Broken pottery, fragments of tools, bones long dry. And then the glimmer of something that should not have been there. A wheel, a fragment of bronze, a shape that did not belong to crumbled stone. Brush away the dirt, clear away the cobwebs, and there it is. A machine, intact, waiting. The first hand that reached for it must have trembled. The first voice that whispered about it must have carried awe and disbelief in equal measure. For what archaeologist expects to find motion among ruins? Yet when fingers brushed against the teeth of a gear, when light fell across its surface, the machine revealed its truth. It still worked, stiffly, stubbornly, but undeniably, and in that moment everything changed. This was no longer just a discovery, it was a confrontation with the impossible. We live in an age that trusts progress. We believe that time moves forward, that what comes later is always more advanced, always more refined. But what happens when something from the past disrupts that certainty? What happens when an object from centuries ago feels impossibly modern, impossibly precise, impossibly alive? The machine unsettles not because it threatens, but because it humbles. It reminds us that we do not know as much as we think we do, that knowledge is fragile, and that brilliance has walked this earth before us and vanished without leaving a trace. Think of the countless generations that passed between its creation and its rediscovery. Think of the kingdoms that rose and fell, the wars fought, The languages born and buried, the books written and burned. Through it all, the machine endured, silent, patient, waiting. And when at last it returned to the light, it did not come as a ruin but as a survivor, as if to say, I was here before you and I will be here after you. What does it want of us, this machine? Nothing, perhaps. It does not demand worship, it does not cry out for purpose. It simply turns when touched, gears aligning as they once did, whispering their secret music. And yet in that turning lies something profound, a reminder that time is not ours alone, that memory does not belong only to the living, that sometimes objects carry stories that words cannot. The machine is less an artifact than a voice without sound, without language, but with presence. And so we begin. Tonight's story is not about solving a puzzle. It is not about pulling apart gears and diagrams until a neat answer emerges. Tonight's story is about surrender, to mystery, to wonder, to the quiet recognition that some things endure precisely because they will not yield their meaning. As you listen, imagine the soft turning of hidden wheels, the click of ancient bronze, the sound of centuries refusing silence. Imagine a presence that waits in the dark, neither asleep nor awake, neither broken nor whole. For this is the heart of the tale, a machine that still works, though no one understands it. A relic that defies time, a heartbeat from an age long vanished, a riddle left to haunt us. It is here to remind us that not everything can be explained, that not everything should be. And as you follow the story, as you drift into the soft currents of mystery, let the machine keep turning in your imagination. Let it whisper its quiet defiance, its secret language. Let it remind you of the beauty of not knowing. The chamber of its discovery was less a tomb than a workshop. When the archaeologists first brushed away the soil that had sealed it for centuries, they did not find the neat solemnity of a burial chamber or the ceremonial grandeur of a temple. What they found instead was something that felt lived in, a place shaped by hands that worked and thought, hands that planned and tested. The walls bore marks of chisels and hammers, grooves etched not by accident, but by deliberate, repeated action. Along the stone shelves, though the jars that once stood there had long since crumbled into nothing but residue, faint shadows of their outlines still clung to the surface, like ghosts unwilling to let go. Black soot clung to the ceiling, whispering of lamps that once filled the room with warmth and light. It was not a place of worship, nor a place of burial. It was a place of making. And at its heart, standing silent yet somehow present, was the machine. It did not command the space like a statue on a pedestal, nor did it announce itself with grandeur. Instead, it rested firmly upon the ground, almost humbly, as though it had simply grown there, as natural as stone itself. Yet there was nothing natural about it. Bronze teeth caught the light of torches as if resisting the years, gleaming faintly, stubbornly. The first time it was touched, those who uncovered it swore they felt something stir within it, a reluctant shifting of parts that seemed not so much mechanical as animal. Like an ancient creature roused from a long hibernation, it answered with the faintest movement. And in that instant, silence deepened. The archaeologists exchanged no immediate words. Their wonder was too great for sound. It spread quietly, widened, eyes a breath held too long, hands hovering in hesitation. For there before them was not a ruin, not a broken remnant of forgotten centuries, but something impossibly alive. The strangeness of it was not only that it had survived, but that it had endured with such completeness. A device exposed to air and damp and soil for 1,000 years should have crumbled into dust. Metal should have corroded. Wood should have rotted. Delicate gears should have fused together in unmovable lumps. And yet here, in the dim glow of their torches, bronze wheels still sat within one another, their teeth intact, their alignment precise, their function undeniable. It was not simply a miracle of preservation. It was an act of defiance against time itself. The chamber became in that instant something more than stone. It became a confrontation. On one side stood the living, modern men and women armed with their tools of science, their notebooks, their cameras, their confident knowledge of history. On the other side stood the machine, silent yet proud, a survivor from an age so distant it had no name. It did not explain itself, it did not declare its purpose, it simply was. And in being, it challenged everything the living thought they knew. They began naturally with touch. Fingers brushed against the gear teeth, against the bronze ribs of its frame. There was a texture to it that felt different than any relic they had known. It was not rough with corrosion. It was smooth, firm, unyielding. Asmol push, tentative, hesitant, and the gears shifted faintly, the motion stiff but real. The sound, soft, almost like a sigh, filled the chamber with something that felt more alive than any voice. Shock did not erupt in exclamations. Instead, it stretched itself out in silence, in a silence so thick it seemed to muffle even the flames. Their torches. Each of them knew, in that moment, that they were no longer archaeologists cataloguing shards and stones. They were witnesses to something that should not have been possible. Questions bloomed instantly, questions that had no roots in certainty. What was it? Who had built it? What was its purpose? And, most unsettling of all, how had it survived? The answers did not come. They would never come. The machine gave nothing away. It offered only the turning of gears, the whisper of bronze, the faint suggestion of intelligence, too deliberate to be chance. The workshop around it only deepened the mystery. The soot on the ceiling was not the residue of a single fire, but of countless lamps that must have burned here night after night. Someone had spent years in this place. The tool marks on the walls, the faint depressions in the floor where feet had stood for hours, the careful organization of shelves, all suggested purpose, repetition, routine. This was no accidental hiding place. It was a room of labor, of creation. The machine had not been placed here as treasure, nor buried as a relic. It had been made here. It had lived here. This was its birthplace. The archaeologists moved carefully, reverently. Brushes swept gently across the floor, uncovering fragments of tools now crumbled, shards of clay that mayonce have held water or oil. They noted the placement of every stone, every mark, every clue, yet all of it only added to the strangeness. For though the chamber told the story of work, the machine itself told the story of genius. Its parts were fitted with a precision that seemed almost alien in its perfection. Bronze gears aligned in ratios so exact that they could not have been the product of trial and error. Whoever made it had knowledge, not the hesitant knowledge of experimentation, but the assured knowledge of mastery. And that mastery, somehow, had vanished from the world without leaving a trace. To stand in that chamber was to feel time collapse. The past was not distant, not dead. It breathed through the faint turning of bronze wheels. It whispered through the soot and the shadows. The workshop was not an empty ruin. It was a frozen moment, a breath held across centuries, and at the center of that breath, the machine waited. As they studied it, more impressions emerged. The frame was heavy but balanced, built not for display but for function. Its gears meshed with a harmony that suggested calculation, mathematics hidden in metal. Some pieces bore markings too faint to decipher, as though symbols had once been etched into the bronze worn away by the passing of time. But no language remained, no manual, no inscription, no guide to its meaning. The silence of its builders was total, and perhaps that was the greatest mystery of all. Not only that such a machine existed, but that it existed alone. No other chamber in the surrounding ruins bore anything like it. No other discovery had ever revealed even a fragment of similar design. It was as though this one creation had been born in isolation, built by hands that carried secrets too heavy to fasten, and then sealed away with deliberate intent. Why hide it? Why bury it? Why create a machine of such brilliance only to let it sleep in darkness? The archaeologists could only speculate. Some believed it was an astronomical device, a model of the heavens crafted to mirror the movement of stars. Others thought it might be a clock, a keeper of time more precise than the crude instruments of later centuries. Still others wondered if it was something altogether stranger, something whose purpose we could no longer even imagine. Yet each theory fell short, for none could answer the one question that loomed above all others. Why had it been made here, in this lonely workshop, and why had no record of its makers survived? The chamber grew heavy with the weight of that silence. To stand before the machine was to feel the limits of human knowledge press inward. It was a reminder that history is not a straight line of progress, but a fragile thread, easily broken, easily lost. Perhaps once long ago there had been many such workshops. Perhaps once long ago knowledge of such machines was common. And then, by war or disaster or simple neglect, it vanished. The thread snapped. The world forgot. All that remained was this one survivor, sealed in stone, whispering across time. And so the archaeologists did the only thing they could. They recorded. They measured. They photographed. They wrote down every detail, knowing all the while that the essence of the machine was beyond their reach. For no matter how many sketches they made, no matter how many notes they took, the heart of it remained silent. It did not offer understanding. It offered only presence. Night after night, they returned to the chamber. Torches burned, voices murmured, hands reached hesitantly toward bronze wheels, and always the machine remained unchanged. It did not yield, it did not explain. It simply turned faintly when touched, its gears whispering as though in private conversation. The archaeologists became its audience, its listeners, and though they could not translate its language, they felt it nonetheless, a language of endurance, of defiance, of mystery. The workshop of time, they began to call it, not because it kept time in the way of clocks, but because it seemed to exist outside of it, resisting decay, resisting silence. It was a place where centuries bent and broke, where the past stood shoulder to shoulder with the present. To enter the chamber was to step into a paradox, a ruin that was not ruined, a relic that was not dead, a machine that still worked, though no one understood it. And thus the questions began. Questions that spread far beyond the walls of the chamber, questions that would ripple through museums and universities, questions that would haunt the minds of those who saw the photographs and touched the replicas. What is knowledge if it can be lost so completely? What is progress if it can be undone by silence? What is time if a machine can stand against it? And most haunting of all, what else waits in the shadows of the earth, still humming softly, still alive, still waiting to be found? The workshop gave no answers. It gave only the machine and the silence that surrounded it. But sometimes silence is more powerful than explanation. Sometimes mystery is more enduring than knowledge. And in that chamber, where soot still clung to the ceiling and bronze wheels still whispered against one another, the silence was everything. It was the silence of centuries. It was the silence of forgotten makers. It was the silence of time itself, pausing just for a moment to let the living glimpse what it had hidden away. The nights that followed the discovery were not ordinary nights. The camp, though set up with the practical neatness of an archaeological expedition, took on an atmosphere that none of its members could name. Lanterns burned longer than they should, half casting long shadows across canvas walls, while voices fell into subdued tones, as if the machine that now rested in the chamber just beneath them demanded reverence. They had uncovered pottery before, tools of bone and flint, fragments of statues, even half-buried walls that once supported forgotten houses. But this was different. This was not the residue of life. It was life disguised in metal. It gave not the silence of a ruin, but the sense of a presence, something waiting, breathing without lungs, listening without ears. The whispers began on the first night, not as stories, but as uneasy admissions exchanged over cups of tea, as the desert air cooled and the stars sharpened above. The students asked their professors if such a thing had been catalogued before, if any museum contained even a mention of such a device. The professors shook their heads, but not with confidence. It was the kind of denial that concealed fear. For, in truth, they all felt the same weight pressing against them. The sense that the machine was not merely an artifact, but a contradiction, a challenge, something that should not exist yet undeniably did. When the winds passed through the camp, they swore they could hear it, a faint grinding softer than the breath of sand against stone. At first, they dismissed it as the imagination's echo. But more than one archaeologist admitted hearing it when they were alone, away from the chamber, as though the machine's sound had followed them, lodged in their ears like a secret they could not shake. It was not constant. It would come like a murmur, a suggestion of teeth brushing against teeth, then vanish into silence, leaving behind a strange hollowness, the kind one feels after the ending of a melody. And in that silence, each of them realized something unsettling. They were not studying the machine, it was studying them. The arguments began on the second night. Around the central table where maps and journals were spread, theories collided like sparks. One insisted it was a clock, though its hands were invisible. Another claimed it must be an astronomical calculator, some tool for mapping the heavens. But when pressed, Noon could explain how. The alignments of the gears did not correspond neatly to constellations, and their measurements defied replication with the rulers and compasses at hand. Some swore the device was a calendar designed to track not just days, but cycles, lunar, solar, perhaps even planetary. But again, the evidence dissolved the moment they tried to hold it. Every hypothesis seemed to vanish under the weight of the machine's own defiance, as if it were built not to answer questions, but to multiply them. In the evenings, after exhaustion dulled their voices, they would fall into silence. Yet the silence was never whole. They could feel the machine in their minds turning invisibly. It whispered in the form of questions they could not ignore. Who had made it? How had they cut bronze so finely that even now, after centuries, the edges had not dulled? How had they joined pieces so seamlessly that the whole moved as one body, precise and patient? And above all, why? The question became heavier than the desert air. Why had anyone built such a thing, only to bury it, only to leave it behind, without word, without purpose, without clue? By the third night, some began to dream of it. One student, pale and trembling, confessed in the morning that she had seen the gears turning in her sleep, each tooth fitting into the next with perfect rhythm, the sound filling her ears until it became unbearable. Another claimed he had dreamed of placing his ear against it and hearing not metal but voices, too muffled to understand but too many to count. These confessions unsettled the camp further. It was as though the machine was not only present in the chamber, but had stretched its influence into the fragile hours of rest, tugging at them when their guard was down. Sleep, once a refuge, became a mirror of unease. They began to wonder if the machine wanted to be remembered, if it was speaking not through sound, but through thought, through visions planted in their tired minds. Still, they returned to it each day. The chamber became a shrine, though no one would dare call it that aloud. They would descend carefully as though entering sacred ground. Lamps would flicker against the walls, illuminating the soot-stained ceiling and the long-forgotten marks of tools etched into stone. And there it was, the bronze construct, standing in silence, neither proud nor humble, neither offering nor denying. They would circle it like worshippers, brushing dust from its surfaces, sketching its outlines in frantic notebooks, measuring angles that betrayed no ordinary symmetry. Each time a hand reached out, the gears would twitch, stiff yet obedient, moving, faintly as though acknowledging the contact. And every time it moved, the camp above grew quieter, as though listening for something they could not name. One evening, a storm rolled over the desert, scattering sand against canvas and filling the air with a low moan. In the chamber below, they gathered around the machine, unwilling to leave it alone in the tremors of the storm. As the wind howled outside, they swore the machine stirred of its own accord. A gear shifted without touch, a faint click echoed in the silence, and all eyes widened at once. No one spoke. No one dared to admit what they had seen, but the storm passed, and afterward none of them could claim the machine was lifeless. Something in it had responded, whether to the storm or to them, they could not say. From that night on, no one doubted it was more than bronze. The whispers in the camp deepened. Not all were scholars. There were workers too, men hired to dig, to lift, to clear debris. They began to void the chamber, muttering that the machine was cursed, that no good could come from disturbing what should have remained hidden. One swore. He had seen it move in the corner of his eye, though he had been alone at the time. Another claimed he heard a hum when standing too close, a resonance that pressed into his bones. Their stories were dismissed by the professors as superstition, yet even the professors avoided looking one another in the eye when the tales spread. For each of them, deep down, carried the same suspicion, that the machine did not simply exist. They had watched, and yet fascination eclipsed fear. They could not look away. Every attempt to categorize it ended in failure, but the failures only deepened their obsession. Journals filled with sketches, diagrams of impossible alignments, lists of measurements that contradicted themselves when repeated. The more they studied, the more they realized the machine refused to belong to their world. It was not Greek, not Roman, not Mesopotamian, not Egyptian. It carried the fingerprints of none of the civilizations they knew. And so it became something else entirely. A voice from an unknown past, a fragment of history that had no place within history, a whisper from a world that had left no other trace. Nights stretched longer, dreams grew stranger, whispers filled the silence between words, and through it all the machine endured, indifferent to their awe, their fear, their sleepless eyes. It whispered not through sound, but through its refusal to be known, and in that refusal it bound them to itself, as though the true purpose of its existence was not to function, but to haunt. No name is attached to its making, no inscription, no symbol, no crest, no trace of signature marks the bronze. Unlike a statue that carries the face of its sculptor, or a temple that bears the language of its priests, this machine resists identity. It exists like a dream remembered without the dreamer, a creation severed from its origin, an echo without source. In its silence, the absence is louder than presence. Historians extend their hands into the darkness of lost centuries, pulling forth possibilities but no certainties. Some whisper of guilds, secret societies of engineers who labored beyond the reach of kings and scribes. Others imagine a lone genius, hidden away in the folds of time, whose brilliance surpassed his age so completely that his own people could not understand him. And some suggest an entire culture, a civilization swallowed whole by time's ocean, leaving behind only this single buoyant fragment of its impossible craftsmanship. The parallels come quickly as they must, for the human mind struggles when confronted with the unknown. It seeks to tether mystery to other mysteries, to weave a net strong enough to hold the ungraspable. The Antikythera mechanism is invoked, the shattered clock of the sea, pulled from the wreckage of a ship that sank 2,000 years ago. It too bore gears, teeth carved into bronze, a whisper of astronomy-made machine, and yet it lies in pieces, corroded, speculative, half understood. The Baghdad battery enters the discussion, that strange clay jar with copper and iron, sparking theories of forgotten electricity. But again, it is ambiguous, broken, incapable of demonstration. This machine, however, is different. It does not rely on speculation, nor invite imagination to complete it. It stands whole. It shifts when touched. It answers the centuries not with silence, but with movement. And that reality bends the mind toward conclusions it does not wish to face. Someone once understood this. Someone shaped it not only to function but to endure. Each gear is cut with precision so exact it resists the erosion of centuries. Each tooth interlocks with its neighbor not crudely but delicately, suggesting tools and skills that, if they existed, have otherwise vanished from human record. No craftsman of bone or bronze could reach such perfection by accident. No culture that leaves only pottery shards and crude weapons could dream such geometry into being. And so the question grows heavier. Whose hands were these, hidden from history yet present in every line of the artifact? The camp above the chamber began to feel those hands in the shadows of their own. Each archaeologist, each worker, each student, when they brushed against the bronze, they felt not only the cold surface of metal, but the warmth of a presence that had passed before them. It was as though fingerprints, though long faded, still pressed invisibly into the grooves of the machine. They would linger too long in silence, tracing with trembling fingertips the lines carved by a hand they could not name. At night, when the lanterns guttered low, they whispered of this touch, of the strangeness of it. To feel so near to someone who had lived 1,000 years ago, or perhaps 10,000, yet to have no record of their breath, their voice, their world. Only the machine remained, a monument not to glory or empire but to function, to precision, to something beyond comprehension. The hidden hands haunted their thoughts. The professors struggled most of all. They had built their reputations upon frameworks, timelines. neat scaffolding of civilizations rising and falling, each with its markers of progress. Pottery leads to metallurgy, metallurgy to architecture, architecture to writing, writing to science, and onward into the narrative of human history. Yet this machine resisted the sequence. It should not exist where it was found, should not belong to the earth that sheltered it. If the hidden hands belonged to a culture unknown, where was the rest of their legacy? Where were their ruins, their language, their graves? If it was the work of a lone genius, how had he conceived what the world around him could not? If it was a guild, why had it hidden itself so completely, leaving behind no trace except this single work of impossible endurance? At times they debated, fiercely, as though raising their voices could break through the silence of centuries. One claimed it was evidence of a lost civilization, one whose brilliance had been extinguished before it could spread. Another rejected this, insisting that civilizations leave footprints too wide to erase, that ruins, inscriptions, trade routes, something would have survived. Yet the room would fall quiet when the question returned. If not a culture, then what? Her mind? A prophet of engineering working in obscurity. But how could knowledge so great have flourished in a single mind and died with it? Greatness spreads, discovery multiplies, genius teaches. And yet there it had not. It had vanished, leaving only this machine as proof it ever lived. As days bled into nights, and nights bled into days, the machine became not only an object of study, but of reflection. They began to see their own hands differently. When they reached for their pens, their brushes, their tools, they imagined themselves as shadows of those other hands. What kind of mind had steadied itself above the bronze? What kind of patience had filed down each tooth with such microscopic precision? What dreams had guided them? What purpose had steadied them against distraction? They could not imagine such work belonging to ordinary survival. This was not a pot to hold water, not a weapon to defend, not a trinket for ritual. This was something else entirely, something beyond necessity. And in that realization, the hidden hands became not only unknown but deeply unsettling. They belonged to minds that thought beyond hunger, beyond shelter, beyond war. They belonged to people who dreamed differently. The students began to sketch comparisons in their journals. One drew a hand beside the gears, labeling it unknown craftsman. Another began a series of notes imagining the society that might have birthed such talent. Were they builders of cities made not of stone but of metal? Did they map the stars with gears instead of ink? Did they vanish in a calamity, their knowledge swallowed by the earth, leaving this lone survivor to bear witness? The notes carried no answers, only the restless human desire to name the nameless, to reclaim the forgotten. Yet even in imagination, the hidden hands resisted capture. They were not content to be assigned identities, they remained always hidden. At night, when the camp lay silent under the canopy of stars, the machine seemed to stir in their minds. It was not that it moved, but that it demanded thought. Even when eyes closed, the image of gears turning lingered, faint but insistent. Some awoke with the sensation that they had been watched, not by a presence in the room, but by a presence across time, the lingering gaze of the hidden makers. They began to dream, as though their sleep had been commandeered. One dreamt of a forge burning not with wood or coal, but with strange fire, where the hidden hands hammered bronze into impossible shapes. Another dreamt of halls filled with machines, each whispering softly as they turned, though when he woke he could remember none of their shapes, only the sound, faint and rhythmic. The dreams carried both awe and dread, for they seemed less like imagination and more like memory, borrowed from a life not their own. The workers whispered of curses, of hands that were not human at all. Some believed the machine had been shaped by gods left as a trial or a gift. Others claimed it was the work of visitors from beyond the stars, beings who had touched the earth only briefly, leaving behind their relic for mortals to puzzle over. The professors dismissed these ideas with sharp words, but even they avoided dwelling too long on them. For in truth, the silence of the hidden hands permitted any possibility. Without name, without record, without context, the imagination rushed in to fill the void. And in that void, everything seemed possible, even the impossible. One evening, as the desert cooled and the stars unfolded above, one of the younger scholars, sat apart from the others, gazing at his own hand in the lantern light. He turned it slowly, tracing the veins, the tendons, the bones beneath the skin. And he whispered, almost to himself, "Our hands are clumsy compared to theirs." No one answered. Him but many heard. And in the silence that followed, they too looked down at their own hands, suddenly ashamed of their limits, humbled by the unseen masters of the machine. It was not merely an artifact, it was a mirror, showing them what humanity could be and what it had once, perhaps briefly, achieved. The hidden hands were gone, but the machine remembered. Its precision was their memory, its endurance their voice. It spoke not in words but in perfection, reminding those who touched it that once, in some forgotten corner of time, someone had reached farther than anyone thought possible. And though those hands had vanished, leaving no name, no city, no scripture, their legacy endured in silence, whispering across the centuries to anyone who dared listen. The archaeologists could not escape this truth. They could not bury it in theory or smother it in speculation. It was there, solid and undeniable, a bronze testament to the genius of ghosts. And so they began to feel not only wonder, but responsibility. For if the hidden hands had trusted time to carry their work forward, then those who'd found it now bore the weight of keeping it alive. The machine had survived centuries of burial. Now it had been exhumed, and with its reappearance came the question, what will you do with it? Will you study, dismantle, replicate, or will you rebury it, hide it again, protect its silence? The weight of that choice grew heavier with each passing day. They were not only excavators, they were inheritors. And in their inheritance they felt the lingering presence of the hidden hands, watching, waiting as though across time itself they demanded an answer. The machine does not speak with words, yet there is a rhythm in its movement that suggests language. To the untrained eye, it is simply wheels within wheels, teeth catching teeth, a choreography of bronze and silence. But for those who linger long, enough to watch, a strange awareness begins to grow. Each alignment feels intentional, as though meaning lies not in what the device does, but in how it chooses to do it. The gears turn with a kind of grammar, a structure that is at once mathematical and poetic. Precision itself becomes its dialect. Ratios are its nouns, cycles are its verbs, and in the dark recesses of its construction, there lies the ghost of a sentence that refuses to be read. Scholars crouched before it as though listening to an oracle. The clicking of its parts was faint, sometimes only audible when the camp was quietest, when even the desert wind seemed to hush itself. An archaeologist wrote in his journal that to watch the gears move was to feel like a child staring at constellations, knowing that a story was inscribed above, but unable to trace the myth with certainty. The gears aligned like stars crossing paths in the heavens, their intervals too exact to be accidental. Was it a calendar of celestial cycles, a map of the heavens? Perhaps. And yet, the more they diagrammed and measured, the less confident they became. The machine's language seemed designed to evade simplification. Mathematicians who later examined, it spoke of ratios so pure they bordered on music. To rotate one gear and watch another respond was to hear, in the imagination, a harmony of numbers. The device seemed to breathe in the mathematics of nature itself. Lunar months, solar years, eclipses, tides, cycles folded upon cycles, whispering to one another in silence. If the builders had encoded knowledge into this object, then that knowledge was not arbitrary. It was universal, a reflection of order that lies beneath the chaos of existence. And still no translation came. To observe was to be enchanted, to measure was to be humbled. The more the scholars studied it, the more it felt alive, not in the sense of having breath or will, but in the sense that it carried memory. Every turn of a wheel was the continuation of a thought begun long ago, a phrase started by vanished voices. The machine did not invent its own language, it inherited it. Those who built it spoke fluently in this tongue of ratios and mechanics, and though their words no longer survive, the machine has remembered them faithfully. We, the inheritors of ruins, are left only with fragments, like eavesdroppers overhearing. A conversation that makes sense to everyone but ourselves. Some insisted that the gears were not meant to be read at all, but to be experienced. Perhaps the language was not about information, but about time itself. A clock does not explain hours, it embodies them. A calendar does not argue the logic of months, it simply displays them. Could it be that this machine was never intended to be understood in our modern sense, but only to be witnessed, its movements guiding those who once stood where we now kneel? If so, then our search for translation was misguided. We were asking for speech when what it offered was song, and yet the temptation to translate was irresistible. Charts multiplied, sketches filled entire notebooks. Scholars traced each tooth of each wheel, recording dimensions with almost devotional care, as though the act of copying might unlock the secret. But each attempt at translation stumbled into the same paradox. The closer one came to explaining its purpose, the more inexplicable it seemed. If it was a clock, why did its cycles extend beyond simple hours? If it was a calendar, why did its ratios defy the neat boundaries of months and years? If it was astronomical, why did it gesture toward alignments no surviving culture had reason to follow? At night, when lanterns burned low, some swore that they could hear it speaking, not in words, but impulses of rhythm, faint clicks carrying through the stone chamber like a voice carried through walls. Others dismissed it as imagination, the mind's attempt to impose meaning on mystery, but the feeling lingered, nonetheless. Machines are built to serve, to perform tasks defined by their creators. This one, however, seemed built to converse, to say something, though we lacked the tongue to answer. One of the younger scholars, a linguist unused to the world of machines, suggested that perhaps they were approaching it incorrectly. "We look for language in words," he said softly, "but perhaps their words were not our words. Perhaps their speech was motion, their poetry was precision." The idea, at first dismissed, began to take root. To watch the machine was to witness a performance. The gears did not require translation. They were already telling a story, but in a medium so alien to us that we mistook it for silence. As days turned into weeks, arguments grew sharper. Some believed that persistence would crack the code, that the device was a text awaiting translation. Others feared that no such breakthrough would come, that the language of gears was one humans had once spoken, but since forgotten, like a script erased from memory. The camp became divided between optimists who mapped endlessly and pessimists who sat quietly before it, content to let the machine murmur without reply. And yet, both groups shared the same unease, the knowledge that someone, somewhere, had once understood perfectly. The mystery deepened when modern replicas were attempted. Craftsmen, with all the tools of industry at their disposal, tried to recreate the gears precisely as they appeared. Their replicas functioned, yes, but never with the same seamless grace. Small flaws introduced friction. Teeth failed to align with the same whispering precision. It was as though the original machine carried not only skill but something more, an understanding of harmony that had been lost in translation to our age. The copy could mimic, but it could not converse. The language, it seemed, was not merely mechanical. It was cultural, even spiritual. This realization left the scholars with a haunting thought. What if the language of gears is only half of the story? What if the missing half lies not in the machine, but in the mind that beholds it? Language, after all, requires both speaker and listener. If we no longer know how to listen, then no translation will ever come. The machine may be perfect, its phrases eternal, but without ears attuned to its music, it speaks only to itself. Night after night, the chamber filled with silence, heavy enough to feel like presence. Candles flickered against bronze surfaces. Shadows moved across teeth and livers. The archaeologists, despite themselves, began to treat it almost reverently. They whispered in its presence, avoided sudden noises, and touched its edges as one might touch the rim of a sacred vessel. It was no longer just a machine. It had become an interlocutor from a vanished world, a witness that would not, or could, not translate its own testimony, and so the language of gears remained, eloquent but undeciphered. Like a forgotten tongue carved into stone, it endured beyond the fall of those who once spoke it. Its precision was too exact, too deliberate, to be anything but intentional. Yet the intention had slipped beyond reach. To study it was to stand before a locked door, hearing faint voices from within, but unable to cross the threshold. Perhaps, some whispered, that was the point. Perhaps the builders had never meant for their descendants or strangers in distant ages to comprehend. Perhaps it was a private language, meant only for those who stood within the same time, gazing at the Zamskis, sharing the same unspoken assumptions. Or perhaps it was meant for us after all, but only if we could relearn how to hear. And so the question endures. What does it mean when a machine speaks but cannot be understood? Is it failure, ours or theirs? Or is it something else entirely? A reminder that not all meaning can be possessed, that some languages exist only to remind us of what has been lost. The gears continue their whispering dialogue, indifferent to our ignorance, speaking fluently in a tongue that once shaped the world. And as they turn, softly, endlessly, we are left to listen, wondering if silence itself is the answer. The first theory that gripped the minds of those who stood before the machine was simple in its elegance. Perhaps this was a calendar, a device not for decoration nor for idle curiosity, but for survival itself. Human beings have always looked upward for guidance, searching the sky for the silent handwriting of the gods. To farmers in every age, the stars were more than distant lights. They were instructions. The rise of a constellation marked the sowing season. The tilt of the sun foretold. Harvest and the darkening of the moon carried warnings that reached into myth. If this machine truly was a calendar of the heavens, then it was not merely a tool but a covenant, a compact between humankind and the sky itself. Historians compared it to the monuments that survive across the world. They thought of Stonehenge, whose megaliths are positioned with uncanny accuracy to the solstices. They remembered the pyramid of Chichen Itza, whose stairway captures the shadow of a serpentine on equinox days. They recalled the pyramids of Giza, whose alignment to Orion's belt ties the fate of kings to the permanence of the heavens. These structures were calendars carved into stone, meant to outlast flesh, meant to endure in the silence of centuries. If stone could speak the language of the stars, why not bronze and gears? Why not a monument of motion rather than of mass? The idea gained momentum. If the machine was indeed a calendar, it would have had immense value. Imagine standing in a world without clocks, without printed almanacs, without the vast computational power of modern astronomy. A device that could predict eclipses would not be an ornament, it would be an oracle. To foresee the darkening of the sun was to hold power over fear itself, for across the ancient world, an eclipse was never a casual event. It was a terror, a disruption of the natural order, a sign that gods were angry or that fate itself had shifted. If someone held a machine that could predict the shadow before it fell, then that person held command over myth. They would know when to reassure their people, when to demand sacrifice, when to cloak knowledge in the language of prophecy. But prophecy is not only about fear, it is about survival. A calendar that told when to sow and when to reap could mean the difference between famine and plenty. A machine that synchronized the labor of the earth with the cycles of the heavens would transform not only agriculture, but religion, governance, and war. For to control time is to control the heartbeat of civilization itself. Kings may rule armies, but priests who measure the skies rule the years. And if this machine truly functioned as such a device, then it would have belonged not to a simple farmer, but to a keeper of mysteries, an astronomer priest, a sage, perhaps even a hidden order of watchers who spoke not Toman, but to the heavens. And yet even as the idea took root, cracks appeared in the theory. For the alignments the scholars traced within the gears did not match the alignments of our own familiar calendars. The ratios seemed close but not exact, cycles that resembled lunar months, but diverged just enough to raise suspicion. Some predicted solar years, others tracked stars we no longer recognize. It was as if the machine were calibrated not to our sky, but to another. Its gears spoke of constellations whose names have vanished, of cycles remembered by no culture that survives. What calendar was this? Whose heavens did it mirror? The realization was unsettling. Perhaps the machine had been constructed in an age when the heavens themselves were mapped differently. Perhaps entire constellations were known by patterns now, forgotten, their myths swallowed by time. The ancients, after all, did not agree upon the stars. Babylonians divided the sky into different houses, then Egyptians, and the Maya measured time in a rhythm alien to the Greeks. What if the machine reflected a cosmology that has not survived in writing, one obliterated by conquest or abandoned in the slow erosion of memory? Then this was not simply a calendar lost to us. It was a worldview erased, a cosmos no longer shared. That possibility changed the tenor of discussion. The archaeologists no longer argued merely about mechanics or astronomy. They began to speak, in hushed tones of memory and forgetting. Civilizations carved calendars not only into stone or bronze, but into the rhythm of their daily lives. To eat, to plant, to mourn, to celebrate, all of these follow the cycle of the sky. To lose a calendar is to lose the scaffolding of existence itself. If this machine truly tracked a sky no longer remembered, then the people who built it did not merely vanish. They vanished with their time, their very sense of days and seasons wiped clean. Some scholars could not bear the weight of that thought. They argued instead that the calendar must still be hidden within known systems, that its cycles, if properly aligned, would reveal themselves to match ours. They spent long nights recalculating, adjusting for precession of the equinoxes, for the drift of the Earth's tilt across millennia. But each adjustment, while promising, ultimately failed to produce harmony. It was as if the machine had been built not for our Earth at all, but for one slightly askew, one whose heavens were tilted, just differently enough to escape recognition. The more the scholars struggled, the more the machine seemed to resist them. It did not open its secrets willingly. They were left with a cruel paradox. The device seemed too precise to be meaningless, yet too alien to be read. Its calendar was closed, its pages sealed. Every gear promised significance, and yet that significance slipped away like sand through fingers. One began to sense in the silence of the chamber that the machine was mocking them, not cruelly, but with the indifference of an ancient intelligence that had once spoken clearly to its own, but now regarded them as strangers. The most radical theory came from those willing to entertain the unthinkable. What if the machine did not mark our calendar because it was not meant for us? What if it tracked cycles that were not earthly, cycles of distant stars, or even of alignments invisible without instruments? Perhaps it was built to map a sky that no longer exists, one where constellations have shifted beyond recognition. Or, perhaps, whispered in even quieter voices, it tracked something other than stars altogether, not the heavens but the underworld, not the sun, but forces hidden beneath the veil of myth. In that case, its calendar would remain forever unreadable, because its subject was not part of our world at all. Whatever the truth, one thing became clear. If the machine was a calendar, then it was one written for eyes that no longer exist. Its pages are turned by gears, not hands. Its prophecies are sealed within ratios, not ink, and its keepers, whoever they were, are gone. The days it counted are days no one remembers. The eclipses it foretold have long since passed, shadows swallowed, into history without witness. Its accuracy, its beauty, its power, all of it now hangs suspended like a clock ticking in an empty room. And still the machine turns. The teeth of its gears whisper their language of time, a litany that once guided the living and now murmurs only to ghosts. It is a calendar of the forgotten, a monument not to memory but to erasure. For even as it preserves the motions of the heavens, it testifies to the silence that follows when noon remains to read. It is a book that writes itself, but is never opened. A prophecy fulfilled long ago, for an audience that has vanished into dust. The scholars who sat with it at night came to feel that they were intruding, that the calendar was not theirs to decipher. They were listeners to a conversation between the machine and Thesky, one that had begun centuries before their births, and would continue long after their deaths. And in that, humility lay a strange kind of peace. For if the calendar would not open to them, then perhaps it did not need to. Perhaps its meaning lay in the simple fact of endurance, that it continued to count days no longer lived, to measure seasons no longer harvested. It was memory itself, preserved in motion, even when no one remained tormember. And so in the silence of the desert, beneath the stars whose light had traveled longer than any civilization endures, the machine continued its quiet work. Its calendar remained closed, its secrets sealed, but those who kept vigil beside it began to realize that perhaps the message was not in the words they could not read, but in the silence itself. Time does not wait to be understood. It moves, and we follow. The machine does not explain, it endures, and in that endurance it reminds us that the heavens themselves have forgotten us, even as we struggle to remember them. At last, with patience and delicate care, modern engineers coaxed the machine into fuller motion. For years it had resisted, its corroded joints stiff, its fragments reluctant to cooperate with the clumsy touch of modern hands. But now, in the stillness of a controlled chamber, lubricants carefully applied and gears set into precise alignment, the ancient bronze stirred, slowly at first, hesitantly, as though uncertain whether it wished to be disturbed, then more confidently, its wheels interlocking, its teeth biting into place. The room filled with the soft, deliberate murmur of motion. The sound was not loud, but within silence it became immense, an audible rhythm, steady and organic, like the breath of some sleeping creature, like the measured beating of a hidden heart. Observers fell quiet. Conversations tapered into whispers and then ceased altogether. The air itself seemed to pause, caught between reverence and unease. It was not the awe of discovery alone, but something stranger, something deeper. They were no longer looking upon a relic, nor a puzzle of lost mechanics. They were in the presence of something that felt alive, not alive in flesh and blood, not alive in the way of man or beast, but alive in the sense that it possessed a will, a rhythm of its own, a continuity that stretched across centuries. Its bronze whispered, its gears turned, and in those motions observers sensed not a tool, but a presence. And presence demands to be acknowledged. Engineers, rational by training, reported a curious sensation. They spoke of the uncanny, how the sound of the gears carried into their bones, how the vibration of the mechanism echoed faintly in their chests. Some likened it to standing near a great bell, even when no bell tolled. Others said it was like sitting beside a slumbering animal, the subtle intake and exhalation of air reminding them that they were not alone. The machine had no lungs, no heart, and yet in its ticking it imitated both. Each turn of the wheel was a breath, each oscillation was a pulse. To stand near it was to feel observed by something neither human nor wholly mechanical. Those who had studied it longest felt the strongest unease. For years they had known it as a silent corpse, a broken device laid bare for autopsy. They had touched its gears with gloved hands, mapped its ratios, traced its inscriptions as one might study the bones of the dead. But now, restored to motion, it no longer lay still under their scrutiny. It responded, it moved, it lived. They were no longer its masters, but its witnesses, and that inversion unsettled them more than they cared to admit. It is one thing to analyze an artifact, another to awaken it. What troubled some most was the impression that the machine seemed not merely alive but aware, not aware in the human sense, with thought and choice, but aware in the way a fire seems aware of its fuel, or a river aware of its banks. It acted with purpose, and purpose implies intention. The steady interlocking of gears, the seamless translation of ratios into rhythm, it was too fluid, too elegant, too deliberate to feel accidental. Watching it was like overhearing a conversation in a language you could not understand but could not mistake for silence. Its voice was its motion, and it spoke in cycles in the endless repetition of turning teeth. Some felt awe in this, and others fear, awe, because it bridged the centuries, allowing the dead to speak in metal. Fear, because to give motion to the past is to invite its return. One archaeologist described the sensation as akin to disturbing a tomb, an act not of science but of trespass. Another confessed privately that they half expected the machine to resist them, to halt of its own accord, to reject their interference, for in its steady ticking there lingered an impression of will, as though it had not been coaxed but permitted, to awaken. The metaphor of breath haunted the observers. They began to speak of the machine as though it inhaled and exhaled. They likened its rhythmic ticking to the rise and fall of a chest, its oscillating gear to the beating of a heart. They even marked pauses, those rare moments when motion stuttered, when friction briefly slowed its turning. and compare them to a sigh. The language of mechanics gave way to the language of bodies, for no one could resist the impulse to treat it as living. It was not a device in their eyes, but a sleeper, a relic that had slumbered for centuries and now stirred beneath their hands. With that language came something darker. If it breathed, could it also die? And if it could die, what had its long sleep meant? Was it rest, or was it burial? One could not escape the image of centuries passing in silence, the world above changing, while the machine lay dormant. Civilizations rose and fell, languages blossomed and withered, kingdoms collapsed into dust, and still it slept, holding within itself a rhythm too patient for human history. To awaken it now was to disrupt that patience, to drag it from a silence. Gaith had chosen. The unease of the observers grew from this realization. They had not simply discovered a machine, they had disturbed one. Engineers measured its movement, cataloguing the ratios with meticulous care. Yet the measurements, though precise, did little to dispel the impression of vitality. Numbers described the gears, but they could not capture the hum, the whisper of bronze upon bronze that seemed to echo beyond calculation. It was not only what the machine did, but how it did it. There was grace in its motion, the elegance of inevitability. Like the steady rhythm of tides, its gears turned with a certainty that was at once comforting and terrifying. Comforting, because it implied order. Terrifying, because it implied that order did not require them. Philosophers among them could not resist drawing comparisons. They spoke of automata described in ancient texts, statues said to walk, birds that sang from concealed pipes, wonders of mechanics long lost. They remembered myths of Hephaestus forging living machines for Olympus, of golems stirred to motion by sacred words. And they wondered, were those merely myths or memories of truths half forgotten? Was this machine, in its breath and its heartbeat, a faint echo of that dream of artificial life? But unlike the myths, this machine was not playful, nor decorative. It did not sing or walk, it did something subtler, something stranger. It persisted. Its breath was not dramatic, its heart not thunderous. It lived not through spectacle but through rhythm. It spoke not through novelty but through endurance. And that endurance made it uncanny. For all things that live must die, and yet here was a breath that had crossed centuries, a pulse that resumed after a silence longer than empires. At night, when most had left the chamber, a few remained. They sat quietly in the dark, listening to its steady whisper. They reported strange feelings, visions half-dreamt. One said he felt the machine was remembering, not simply turning. Another claimed that in its rhythm he sensed not only motion but meaning, as though each rotation marked more than time. These confessions were not shared publicly, for to admit them was to risk mockery. Yet privately they could not be shaken. The machine in its breath seemed to carry a memory older than their world. Even the skeptics, those most insistent on rational explanation, admitted to discomfort. They explained, "Say it away. Humans are hardwired to detect life in rhythm, to anthropomorphize motion, to project breath into anything that moves steadily." But explanations did not soften the unease, for even if the sensation were illusion, the illusion was powerful. It did not matter whether the machine was alive, it mattered that it felt alive. Presence is not diminished by rationalization, and so the chamber became a kind of sanctuary, half laboratory, half shrine. The engineers continued their work, but with reverence, as though performing a ritual rather than an experiment. They handled the gears not as mere metal but as relics. They listened not for data, alone but for whispers. In time, some even adjusted their language, no longer speaking of repairing or reconstructing the device, but of awakening it. It was no longer a problem to be solved, but a being to be tended. Presence once felt cannot be forgotten. The machine breathed, and those who heard its breath knew they were not alone. They had touched something older than history, something that moved not in words or images but in rhythm. And in that rhythm they sensed both comfort and warning. For to awaken breath is to awaken being, and being, once stirred, will not easily return to sleep. What kind of mind built this? The question lingers in every examination of the ancient device. haunting the engineers, historians, and dreamers who gaze upon its interlocking gears. Was it the hand of a priest, guided by the heavens, seeking to impose order upon the chaos of the sky? Was it the ambition of a king, eager to seize dominion over time itself, using the stars and eclipses as instruments of power? Or was it perhaps the quiet labor of a craftsman, a genius unsung whose name was lost to the dust before even his children could remember it? The machine does not say. It turns without words, it breathes without voice, yet within every tooth of Bronzeley's the undeniable echo of a maker's vision. The machine is more than engineering. It is a dream given form. The gears are its sentences, the ratios its poetry, the oscillations its rhythm. To build such a device required not only knowledge of the heavens, but also imagination, the ability to conceive of celestial order in metal, to translate cycles of stars into cycles of gears. It was not the labor of accident, but of intent. Behind it stands a mind, human and mortal, that dared to bind eternity into wheels of bronze. And though centuries have erased that mind's name, the echo persists. Each turning gear whispers of a dream once dreamt, a vision once burning in the mind of someone who lived and breathed, and chose to leave behind this fragile monument of time. Humanity builds because it wishes to endure. We raise monuments of stone, write words upon parchment, carve symbols into rock not merely for ourselves, but for those who come after. To be forgotten is the deepest fear. To leave something behind is the only reply. This machine is one such reply, a defiance against silence, a voice that speaks not in syllables but in ratios, proclaiming across centuries, I was here. I understood. I dreamed. And yet in that proclamation lies its deepest tragedy. For though the machine remembers, though it turns with the same rhythm its maker intended, we no longer understand the full measure of what it remembers. The solitude of their machine is profound. It remembers a sky mapped differently, a calendar no longer ours, a rhythm of harvests and eclipses alien to modern reckoning. Its gears preserve a worldview we can glimpse but not fully grasp. The maker is gone, the society that shaped them has vanished, and only this bronze echo remains. We gaze upon it as children, listening to a story told in a lost tongue, catching fragments of meaning but missing the fullness of the tale. The machine is faithful to its purpose, but faithfulness is not enough when memory fades on the other side. It turns, it breathes, it remembers. But we do not remember enough to meet it halfway. Consider the life of the maker, whoever they were. Imagine the long hours in a dim workshop, bronze filings in the air, the sharp scent of metal heated and shaped. Imagine the careful chiseling of teeth, each cut deliberate, each fraction measured with precision so fine it defies the assumption of primitive antiquity. This was no casual tinkering, no idle craft. This was labor sustained by vision, guided by belief, perhaps even sanctified by ritual. To translate the heavens into gears is no small thing. It is an act of devotion as much as invention. The maker's mind must have walked a strange path, part scientist, part poet, part priest. And what of the motive? Was the device meant to guide? Agriculture, ensuring the survival of a people by predicting the best times to sow and reap. Was it political, granting a ruler the divine aura of one who could command the sky? Was it philosophical, a meditation on the symmetry of cosmos and earth, a way of holding infinity in the palm of one's hand? Or was it perhaps all of these at once? The truth is lost, but in the echo of its precision, we sense a depth of purpose. This was not frivolity. This was necessity, whether spiritual, practical, or political. It was a machine built to matter. In this way, the device becomes a mirror of humanity itself. We are creatures who refuse the silence of death. We build pyramids, cathedrals, libraries, spacecraft. We bury time capsules in the earth. We engrave plaques and send golden records into the void of space, hoping that someone someday might hear us whisper across the gulf. This machine is such a whisper. It was meant for someone, for descendants, for priests, for future kings, or perhaps even for gods. But now, as we struggle to decipher its language, it speaks most clearly of solitude. It is a survivor of its world, but a survivor cut off from those who once understood it. There is a haunting irony in this. The maker sought permanence, but permanence without context becomes isolation. The machine endures, yet the dream it embodied is fractured. We can reconstruct its motion, we can admire its precision, but we cannot fully know the mind that made it. In every turn of its wheels lies a gulf, the distance between intention and survival. It has endured beyond empires, but in enduring it has become orphaned. It remembers, but it remembers alone. This loneliness is not unique to the machine. It is the fate of all monuments. The builders of Stonehenge aligned their stones to the solstices, but their voices are gone. We speculate upon their purpose in ignorance. The scribes of Mesopotamia carved tablets, but many of their languages are undeciphered, their stories silent. The makers of this device joined that lineage of longing, adding bronze to the catalogue of memory. They succeeded and failed. Succeeded because their creation endures. Failed because we no longer share the world it was meant to describe. Their echo reaches us, but muffled, distorted, a voice across water, fading before it can be understood. And yet, paradoxically, it is in this failure that the device becomes most powerful. For in its silence, in its partial unknowability, it awakens imagination. We fill the gaps of its forgotten story with our own dreams. We project onto it the ambitions of kings, the devotions of priests, the genius of anonymous craftsmen. Its echo is incomplete, and therefore it multiplies. Each viewer adds their own voice, their own interpretation, until the machine becomes not one story but many. The solitude of its memory becomes the soil in which countless new dreams grow. Still, the mind that first conceived it deserves our awe. To look upon this device is to confront the brilliance of a human being long vanished. Someone stood beneath the same stars we see and thought, I will capture them. I will shape their rhythm in metal. I will give their cycles a form that will endure. That thought, that daring leap, is itself a kind of immortality. We may not know their name, but we know their dream, because it turns before us, whispering across time. The machine is their voice, and in hearing it we honor them. The echo of the makers, then, is twofold. It speaks of their genius, yes, but also of their mortality. The device endures precisely because its creator did not. It remembers because the human memory did not. It is a paradoxical survival. The more vividly it breathes, the more clearly it reminds us of the silence left by its maker. It is, in this sense, both a triumph and a lament. Triumph because it proves what the human mind can achieve. Lament because it shows how quickly human identity fades, leaving only traces, only whispers. We often imagine the past as static, but in truth it is filled with echoes such as these. Every ruin, every artifact, every inscription is a voice half heard. This machine is simply one of the loudest, not because it speaks words, but because it moves. In its motion we feel its maker's hand still guiding it. In its breath we sense the persistence of their will. It is not alive, and yet it makes us feel the presence of life. That presence is the echo of its maker, and it endures beyond name, beyond language, beyond even understanding. Perhaps this is the truest purpose of all human creation. Not to be perfectly understood, not to preserve every detail, but simply to leave an echo. To say to the future, we were here and we dreamed. In this light, the machine achieves more than we might grant it. It does not merely remind us of forgotten calendars or lost rituals. It reminds us of ourselves, of our endless striving to resist. Silence to leave behind something that outlives us, even if it does so incompletely. Thus the machine turns, and with each turn it calls out across time. Not for kings, not for priests, not for craftsmen, but for us, the inheritors of its echo. We cannot hear it as its maker did, but we can hear it nonetheless, and in that hearing we join a chain of memory stretching farther than we know. The tragedy of its solitude is real, but so too is the wonder of its endurance. It remembers even when we cannot, and in its remembering it keeps alive the most human of all desires, to be known even in silence. Closer study suggests it maps more than time. It is not simply a calendar of days or a predictor of eclipses, though it does those things with uncanny precision. Some who have gazed upon its bronze gears whisper that it's a map, a chart of the heavens themselves. It may track the wandering of planets across the sky, the seasonal march of constellations, the slow breathing of celestial cycles so vast that no single lifetime could encompass them. If this is true, then the device is not merely a machine. It is a universe made small, a cosmos in bronze. It collapses heaven into motion, reduces infinity into something that can be held in two hands. To look at it is to look at the stars contained in a wheel, the night sky miniaturized and tamed. But to us, the map cannot be read. Its symbols are gone, its labels worn smooth, its scales unknown. We turn its gears, we trace its ratios, but Thiki has been lost. To gaze upon it now is to gaze upon a star chart, written for an Earth that is no longer ours. It is a script whose language is silence, a guidebook for travelers of skies we no longer inhabit. And in that realization lies a thought both haunting and humbling. Perhaps the heavens themselves have shifted. Perhaps the constellations have drifted. The cycles shifted, the sky reconfigured. If so, then this machine aligns itself with a cosmos that has already passed away. Consider what it means to map the heavens. For ancient peoples, the night sky was not merely decoration. It was the greatest text ever written, a book of light that told the story of gods and seasons, of birth and death, of journeys and returns. Farmers relied upon the rising of certain stars to know when to plant and when to harvest. Priests watched eclipses and comets as omens, as messages written by divine hands. Navigators steered their ships by the stars, trusting them as the surest of guides. The sky was calendar, compass, scripture, and oracle. To build a machine that could capture it was to take the infinite and render it comprehensible, to place the vault of heaven upon a table. The ambition of such a device is staggering. It suggests not only observation but mastery. Whoever built it sought to bind the cosmos into a framework, to transform mystery into mechanism. To turn the gear was to move the stars. To spin the wheel was to retrace the path of the planets. The maker reduced vastness into something small, something graspable, something human. And in that act, the heavens themselves became knowable in a new way. Not as myths alone, not as stories passed from mouth to mouth, but as ratios, cycles, harmonies of movement. It was an astronomy both spiritual and mechanical, where divinity and precision coexisted. And yet, for us, the meaning slips through our fingers. The machine speaks of skies no longer identical to ours. Constellations have drifted over millennia, has tilted the axis of the earth. Calendars have shifted with empires and religions. What once aligned so perfectly may now seem estranged. It is as though we are holding a map of a country whose borders have since been redrawn, a chart of rivers that no longer flow, mountains that no longer rise. The heavens above us are familiar, yet subtly different. The machine remembers the sky as it once was, a sky long vanished, a sky that belonged to a different earth. This realization deepens its mystery. Was the device built to preserve knowledge of a sky already changing? Was it a way of fixing the stars in memory, ensuring that future generations could recall what the heavens once looked like? Or was it perhaps intended as prophecy, not merely mapping the present, but anticipating the future? Did the maker imagine that the device could outlive the shifting of constellations, surviving as a witness to the slow drift of the cosmos? If so, then the machine is both a record and a warning, a reminder that even the heavens, once thought eternal, are subject to change. Imagine holding this machine in the ancient world. In a society where most knowledge was carried by memory and story, here was an artifact that contained the cosmos itself. To the uninitiated, it would have seemed miraculous. Turn a gear and see the sky unfold, predict the hidden path of Venus, reveal the date of an eclipse before the shadow even darkened the land. To those who believed the heavens were the realm of gods, such knowledge would have appeared as power beyond mortal reach. And yet, the machine suggests not divine intervention, but human understanding. It is a declaration. The sky can be measured, mapped, reproduced. The infinite can be rendered finite. The God's domain can be held in one's hand. But power such as this would not have been neutral. To chart the heavens was to hold sway over both ritual and authority. Imagine a priest revealing the date of an eclipse to a crowd who believed it to be divine anger. Imagine a king timing his conquests with celestial alignments, lending the aura of inevitability to his rule. Imagine a navigator guiding his fleet. With precision, no rival could match. The map of heaven was also a map of power on earth. To collapse infinity into bronze was to collapse authority into the hands of whoever held the machine. It was in its way both a scientific instrument and a throne, and yet here it lies before us, stripped of its context. Whatever ceremonies once surrounded it are gone. Whatever rulers once claimed its wisdom are dust. The map remains, but its key has been erased. We turn it in our hands and recognized its genius, but not its full message. It is like a musical instrument whose song has been lost. The strings remain, the wood endures, but the melody has faded from memory. We can pluck at it, but the true song belongs to another age. Still, in this very gap lies its enduring beauty. For though we cannot read it as its maker intended, we can still marvel at what it implies. The notion of collapsing the cosmos into gears is itself staggering. It speaks to a human desire that has never vanished, the longing to hold the universe, to make the vast intimate, to transform the unreachable into the knowable. We still map the heavens today, sending satellites into orbit, launching telescopes that peer into galaxies far beyond our sight. We still draw charts, build models, construct simulations that reduce infinity to the dimensions of a screen. The impulse is the same, to take the ungraspable and render it graspable. The difference is only in scale. Where once bronze gears sufficed, now silicon circuits do the work. And so, when we look upon this machine, we see not only the past, but also ourselves. We see the continuity of human curiosity, the unbroken thread of our desire to chart the skies. We also see the fragility of our maps. For just as the constellations drift, so too do our models change. What we believe eternal may prove fleeting. The universe is not static, it breathes, shifts, evolves. Our maps are always approximations, always destined to be replaced. The ancient machine reminds us that even our most precise understandings are temporary, that the heavens we chart today may not be the heavens our descendants know tomorrow. Perhaps this is the ultimate message of the device. It is not simply a map, but a mirror of impermanence. It shows us that knowledge is always bound by time, that even the sky itself changes. The cosmos we think eternal is, in truth, as mortal as we are, not in its existence, but in its form as we perceive it. To map it is to capture only a moment, a breath, a single rhythm in an endless dance. The machine is one such breath caught in bronze, preserved against silence. But like all breaths, it is fleeting. Its alignment with the heavens has already drifted. It is now a relic not only of human ingenuity, but of the sky's own passage. And yet, there is consolation in this. For even if we cannot read its map fully, we can still hear what it whispers, that the heavens are knowable, that they can be traced, that they are within reach of human understanding. The device may no longer align with the stars, but it aligns with something deeper, the unchanging desire of humanity to reach beyond itself. Its true map is not of constellations or planets, but of human imagination. The cosmos, it collapses, is not merely the heavens above, but the cosmos within, the mind that dreams, that calculates, that dares to believe the infinite can be held. Thus, the machine remains before us, a cosmos in miniature, a universe in bronze. We cannot follow its paths as its maker once did, but we can still marvel at the audacity of the attempt. To map the heavens is to touch eternity, however briefly, and to leave behind a mark that endures beyond the shifting of stars. The machine has done this. It remembers a sky that has already passed, and in remembering it, it reminds us of our own fleeting place beneath the stars. The heavens change, the earth changes, but the human desire to chart, to know, to dream, that endures. And so, we return to the haunting thought, perhaps the heavens themselves have changed, and the machine no longer aligns with the sky above. But perhaps that is not its failure. Perhaps that is its lesson. For in showing us a cosmos already gone, it teaches us that the universe is not fixed but alive. It breathes, it drifts, it evolves. Our maps, no matter how precise, are always provisional. The true cosmos cannot be captured fully. It can only be echoed. And in that echo, whether in bronze gears or digital code, we hear the same enduring truth. The stars may change, but the dream of mapping them never does. Time passed, and the world of scholarship moved forward in leaps and bounds. Computers grew from room-sized leviathans into devices smaller than books. Telescopes peered deeper into the dark oceans of the cosmos. Mathematics bent itself to quantum riddles and relativity's strange curves. Yet, in all this progress, the machine remained immovable, unmoved, unyielding. Every decade brought new hands, new eyes, new theories, and yet none could break it. It seemed to wear its enigma like armor, every attempted explanation sliding off, its bronze surface as water slides off stone. To study it was to enter into a dialogue with silence, a silence more eloquent than words. And so it came to be known not simply as an artifact, not simply as a relic of curiosity, but as a code that no one in all the centuries since its rediscovery has ever cracked. At first, hope blazed brightly. Scholars approached it, with the faith of children handed a locked box, certain that time and patience would reveal the key. They diagrammed the gears with painstaking care, sketched each tooth, measured each angle. Computers were fed its proportions, simulations ran night and day, theories stacked higher than the shelves that held them. Each new generation was sure that it would be the one to finally pierce its riddle. But always, at the last moment, clarity dissolved like mist. Some ratio would refuse to align, some cycle would falter, some function would not resolve into coherence. The machine seemed to laugh without sound, to whisper in its movements, "Not yet, not you," and so frustration set in. Scholars quarreled bitterly. Entire careers were spent orbiting this single object and still nothing. Some insisted it was incomplete, that pieces had been lost, gears stolen or corroded away. Others argued it was whole, but encoded in a symbolic system no longer known to us, a kind of mechanical script without a Rosetta Stone. Still others wondered if it had ever been meant to be understood by outsiders at all. Perhaps it was a private language, a personal tool of a single mind locked forever to those who did not share its way of thinking. Yet the failure to solve it did not lessen its hold on the imagination. On the contrary, it grew. For what is more intoxicating to the human spirit than a mystery that resists solution? A puzzle undone, a riddle unsolved, is not a failure, but a lure. To know that it has meaning, and to stand just at the edge of that meaning without reaching it, is to feel both haunted and compelled. Like moths circling a flame they cannot touch, generations of thinkers found themselves drawn back to it. Its silence became an invitation, its resistance an obsession. Consider what this reveals about us. For all our triumphs, for all our science, we are not accustomed to limits. We like to believe that every question has an answer, that every code can be broken. That knowledge bends to persistence. We have split the atom, mapped the genome, sent machines to the outer planets. And yet here lies a device made not with lasers or satellites, but with bronze hammered in fire and cut by hand, and we cannot unravel it. What does that say about the arrogance of progress? What does that whisper to us in the quiet hours when the mind admits its doubts? Theories sprouted like weeds, each one nurtured, each one eventually abandoned. Some said it was a clock, not of hours but of centuries, measuring cycles of time too vast for us to notice. Others claimed it charted the heavens, not as they are but as they were, locking into bronze the memory of constellations that no longer align above us. A few whispered of darker uses, that it was a key to rituals now forgotten, a machine not of science but of ceremony, meant to bridge man and gods. None of these claims held, yet none could be dismissed entirely, for the machine offered no counter-argument. It simply kept moving, slowly, patiently, as if amused by the clamor of guesses. Around it, attempts at replication filled museums and universities. Skilled artisans built copies in brass and glass, engineers reconstructed it in steel, and digital models spun across screens. These models moved smoothly, predictably, offering glimpses of how the gears might have interlocked, how cycles might have repeated. And yet even these replicas seemed hollow. They mimicked its form but not its soul. They worked, yes, but they did not feel alive in the way the original did. There was something in its weight, its patina, its silence between movements that replicas could not imitate, as though its mystery lay not only in its design, but in the centuries it had endured, the echo of hands, long vanished, pressed invisibly into its surfaces. In time, a darker suspicion began to creep in. What if it was never meant to be solved? What if its purpose was precisely to remain beyond us, to serve as a reminder of what we cannot know? There are stories across cultures of riddles that cannot be answered, of labyrinths built without exits, of mysteries preserved as sacred rather than solved. Perhaps the machine belongs to that lineage, not a tool for us but a mirror for us, reflecting the boundaries of our reach. Still, the search continues. In hidden labs and quiet museums, the gears are measured again, their ratios fed into ever more powerful algorithms. Astronomers compare its cycles to forgotten calendars. Linguists search for symbols etched too faint to see. Physicists imagine it as an analog to principles we have not yet discovered. And always, just at the edge of clarity, the meaning slips away. Each attempt leaves behind not resolution but wonder, not closure but humility. The machine is not passive in this relationship. To study it is to be changed by it. Those who spend years with it describe dreams filled with turning gears, with skies folding into circles, with time collapsing into rhythm. They wake unsettled, not by nightmares, but by the sense that something vast has brushed against them. A scholar once wrote, after decades of labor, "It is not the machine that refuses to reveal itself. It is we who are not yet capable of listening." And perhaps that is the truth. Perhaps the code is not broken because it is not meant to be broken yet. Perhaps we are still children before a book we cannot yet read. But then another question arises. What if the machine does not wait for us at all? What if it has already served its purpose long ago, and now exists only as a husk of meaning we can no longer access? A lock with no door, a script with no reader. That possibility chills, for it suggests that knowledge can die, not just be forgotten, but rendered permanently unreachable. If so, then the machine is not only a mystery, it is a tomb not of bones, but of thought. And yet, for all the unease it brings, humanity cannot let it go. The code calls, and we return to it again, and again as if compelled by something deeper than reason. We may never solve it. But perhaps the point is not solution. Perhaps the point is to remember that there are things beyond us, that not every riddle yields, that even in an age of answers, mysteries remain. The machine endures, the gears turn. And in their silence, we are reminded of our place, brilliant, ambitious, fragile, and unfinished. The code no one cracks is not simply an enigma, it is Allison. It teaches us that not all knowledge is ours, not all wisdom can be reclaimed, not all creation can be translated. And in that humbling realization lies a strange kind of beauty, for to live in a world with mysteries is to live in a world still alive. There comes a moment when every rational explanation falters that darker theories begin to stir. What if the machine was never a scientific device at all? What if we, with our modern eyes, sharpened by telescopes and laboratories, have been staring too hard at the wrong truth? What if this intricate arrangement of bronze, this turning body of gears and cycles, was not a tool to measure the heavens, but a vessel to speak to them? In such a light, the machine ceases to be an instrument of astronomy and becomes instead an altar. Its cycles not calculations but prayers, its turning not analysis but offering. In its motion, one can imagine the pulse of ritual, a steady rhythm, echoing with reverence, not curiosity. Ancient cultures often blurred the line between what we would call science and what we would call religion. To light fire was not only to harness a tool, but also to summon a divine flame, stolen from gods or gifted by ancestors. The wheel was both practical device and sacred circle, symbol of eternity's unbroken path. Time itself was not a measurement, but a holy rhythm, a dance between human labor and divine cycles. In such a world, how could one separate gears from prayers or bronze from belief? The machine, in this sense, may not have been a scientific model of the cosmos, but a sacred performance. Of it, a mechanical hymn whose notes were etched in metal rather than sung in air. The suggestion unsettles modern minds, for we are accustomed to separating faith from function. A microscope is not a shrine, a calendar is not a prayer. And yet, in the world that birthed this machine, those categories did not exist as we know them. To map the heavens was to honor the gods who dwelt among them. To predict an eclipse was not merely to forecast shadow, but to prepare the community for divine disturbance. If the machine's gears charted celestial cycles, they may not have done so to satisfy curiosity, but to enact ritual obligations. Each turn of the handle, each slow movement of the cogs, may have been part of a ceremony performed not to explain the heavens, but to call upon them. Imagine such a ritual. A figure, priest, king, or intermediary, stands before the devis. The room is dim, lit only by flame. The machine, polished and gleaming in its youth, catches the light, its surfaces glowing with amber and gold. Hands turn the wheel. Slowly, silently, the gears awaken. Constellations shift across its face. Bronze planets trace their paths. Cycles of sun and moon whisper through the motion of metal. To the eyes of those gathered, this is not mere mechanism. It is cosmos in motion. The universe itself, compressed into human hands, stirred alive by ritual. And as the gears turn, so too might prayers be spoken, sacrifices offered, intentions sealed. The machine does not measure the heavens, it summons them into presence. If this is true, then its meaning lies not in what it does, but in what it once meant. Its purpose was symbolic, relational, sacred. It was a bridge between worlds, bronze standing in for divine presence. Perhaps it marked festivals not to align harvests with seasons, but to align worship with celestial will. Perhaps its cycles were not calendars but chants, its rotations not calculations but invocations. Each turn would repeat the world's rhythm, echoing creation, reminding the community that their lives were woven into the fabric of a cosmos, both vast and near. Such an interpretation forces us to confront how modern assumptions might blind us. We search for equations, for astronomical alignments, for mechanical efficiency. But what if efficiency was never the point? What if the machine was valuable precisely because it was slow, mysterious, awe-inspiring? Ritual thrives on repetition, on slowness, on the weight of symbolic gestures. The act of turning the gears may have mattered more than the outcome. To complete the cycle may have been to complete the prayer. Other artifacts lend weight to this suspicion. Ancient temples often aligned with solstices and equinoxes, not for scientific curiosity, but for ritual resonance. Stone circles, pyramids, and ziggurats were built not merely as observatories, but as sanctuaries, where observation was inseparable from worship. Why should a machine be different? It too could be a temple, though in miniature, its architecture not of stone but of bronze, its alignment not of massive pillars but of delicate wheels. Where a great temple embodied the cosmos in space, the machine embodied it in motion. Both were ritual tools. Both sought to hold the universe within reach. There is also the haunting possibility that the machine's secrecy was intentional. Sacred knowledge was often hidden, guarded by priests, withheld from the common eye. Perhaps the gears were not meant for everyone. Perhaps only a chosen few were permitted to touch it, to set it in motion, to hear its metallic whispers echo in ritual halls. Its secrecy would then not be an accident of time, but a deliberate act of reverence. We cannot solve it now, because we were never meant to. Its purpose was always hidden, wrapped in the sanctity of ritual, guarded against unworthy eyes. Such secrecy breeds tragedy. For if the knowledge was ritual, then when the last keeper died, the meaning died with them. The machine endured, but its spirit dissolved. What remains is a body without breath, a performance without actors, a prayer without believers. We gaze upon it as archaeologists, seeing only gears and ratios, while those who once beheld it saw cosmos alive in bronze. We chase after its utility, but they would have felt its sanctity. The true loss, then, is not that we do not understand its science, but that we no longer share its faith. And yet, even in our ignorance, we feel something of that sacred weight. To stand before the machine is to feel unease, reverence, humility. Its silence presses against us. Its endurance commands respect. Perhaps we cannot speak its prayers, but we can still hear their echoes in its presence. The gears may be mute, but the ritual they once carried leaves behind a residue, faint but unmistakable. It is the residue of awe, the sense that this object once held meaning so immense that it overflowed its bronze cage. Some dismiss this theory, insisting that ritual is too nebulous, too unprovable. They crave function, clear explanations, demonstrable outcomes. But in seeking certainty, they may miss the larger truth, that humanity has always enshrined its deepest mysteries in symbols, and that symbols need not be solved to be powerful. Whether or not the machine was a ritual object, in fact, it functions as one now. It inspires wonder, reverence, mystery. It demands not only analysis but contemplation. It is an altar of questions, a relic of silence, a sacred puzzle. Perhaps then the greatest mistake is to insist that the machine was either scientific or religious. In its time, such a division may not have existed. It could have been both, seamlessly, without contradiction. To measure the heavens was to worship. Them to chart their cycles was to participate in their divinity. The machine then was a ritual of knowledge, a technology of faith. Its bronze gears were both instruments and prayers, both tools and offerings. It was not either or but both, and a synthesis we can scarcely imagine today. The thought is unsettling but also humbling. It suggests that our categories, science here, religion there, are fragile constructs, products of our modern age. The ancients did not live in such tidy boxes. They lived in a world where every flame was both physics and miracle, every star both light and spirit, every cycle both calculation and prayer. The machine belongs to that world, not ours, and so we misunderstand it, not because it is obscure, but because we are. What then are we to do? Perhaps the answer is not to crack the code, but to honor it, to let it remain as it is, ritual in bronze, mystery in motion, silence in metal. Perhaps its meaning is not meant to be extracted, but to be felt. Its gears do not need to yield their secret for them to whisper truth. The machine may never speak plainly, but in its refusal it teaches us something profound, that not all meaning lies in knowledge, and not all mysteries exist to be solved. Some exist to be revered. And so the machine turns, quietly, patiently, across centuries. Its bronze teeth bite into one another as they once did, their cycles echoing rituals long vanished. The prayers once spoken alongside it have fallen silent, but still it hums in its own way, carrying within it the memory of reverence. Perhaps that is its truest function, to remind us that even in an age of science and certainty, there remains room for awe, for humility, for ritual. It endures not only as a puzzle of engineering, but as a monument to belief. And in that endurance lies its most haunting beauty, that though the believers are gone, the ritual remains, waiting, eternal in bronze. Imagine, if you will, the last keeper of the machine. Not its maker, perhaps, but the final custodian, the one who lived in the shadow of its genius, who held the keys to its operation after all others had gone. This solitary figure is not preserved, in inscriptions, nor in chronicles, nor even in rumor. And yet, by necessity, such a figure must have existed, for no device of such complexity survives centuries without care. Bronze needs tending. Gears must be oiled, cleaned, guarded against the creeping fingers of corrosion. Knowledge so delicate, so specialized, so bound to rhythm and precision cannot vanish in an instant. It dwindles. It passes from master to apprentice until one day the chain breaks. The last keeper is that breaking point, the human soul in whom an entire world of understanding flickered for the final time before darkness claimed it. Picture them in twilight, a lone presence in a quiet chamber. The machine sits before them, heavy with silence, its bronze polished by decades of touch. Outside, the stars turn cold and indifferent, but within these walls the heavens are coaxed into motion by human hand. A wheel turns, a gear shifts, and the sky itself is mirrored in miniature. Only the keeper knows the language of its movements. Only they can read its signs. In their solitude, they carry more than knowledge. They carry the burden of exclusivity, the ache of being the last. Loneliness would have defined such a life. To possess knowledge too fragile to pass on is to be caught between worlds. Perhaps the keeper tried, whispering instructions to apprentices who nodded politely, yet never grasped the intricacy. Perhaps they scribbled notes which were later dismissed, misplaced or burned. Or perhaps they kept their silence, weary of explaining to earstew dulled by time's disinterest. There is a certain cruelty in being the final steward of wisdom. Every attempt to share it becomes a reminder that the thread is thinning, that the line will end with you. Each failed lesson is an echo of extinction. Did the keeper despair, or did they accept their fate with calm? It is tempting to imagine despair, that moment of bitter realization when they knew their voice would be the last to speak the machine's true meaning. In that despair lies tragedy, the weight of futility pressing against human spirit. But perhaps acceptance was possible too. Perhaps the keeper, standing beneath the endless stars, found comfort in the endurance of the object itself. They may have reasoned that while memory fades, bronze endures. While names are lost, gears persist. Perhaps they died with the quiet assurance that though their own story would end, the machines would not. The burden, however, was never merely technical. To be the last keeper was also to inhabit a liminal role between human and divine. For, if the machine was indeed a mirror of the heavens, then its caretaker was a priest of sorts, a mediator between cosmos and community. Their task was not only maintenance, but guardianship of meaning. To oil a gear was to keep prayer alive. To align a wheel was to hold order against chaos. Each act of preservation carried symbolic weight, whether or not they still believed in the gods who once animated the ritual. Even if belief had withered, duty remained. And duty, in its own way, can become sacred. The keeper's solitude may also have been haunted by memory. Did they recall the days when the machine was not silent, when others gathered around, when its cycles were part of living ritual or living knowledge? Perhaps, as they turned its gears, they heard ghostly voices, teachers, priests, kings, echoing from the past. To keep the machine alive was also to keep those echoes alive, however faint. The loneliness of the last keeper was not only absence of peers, but also the presence of ghosts, reminders that what once was vibrant had become shadow. What kind of person could endure such a life? A scholar, patient and meticulous perhaps? Or a priest, bound by oaths to tend what others forgot? Or even a simple craftsman, trained in maintenance, but never fully grasping the cosmic scale of what they preserved? It is possible that the last keeper did not even understand the entirety of their burden. They may have followed instructions by rote, preserving the device without comprehending its full meaning. If so, their loneliness was even deeper. To protect knowledge without truly owning it is to live forever on the edge of comprehension, burdened with secrets one cannot entirely decode. But let us imagine they did understand, that they knew the machine's function, its rituals, its mysteries. How unbearable, then, to watch the world around them drift into ignorance. How cruel to see stars lose their voices in the minds of neighbors, while within the machine they still sang. How heavy to carry constellations in memory when others saw only scattered lights. The keeper became an island of knowledge in a sea of forgetting, and islands, no matter how strong, are eroded by time's waves. What did their final days look like? Did they keep tending the gears until their hands could no longer turn? Did they train an apprentice who abandoned the duty after their death? Or did the machine one day fall silent, its wheels unmoved, its oil unrenewed, its bronze slowly surrendering to green corrosion? In that silence the keeper's presence dissolved. No inscription, no monument, not even a name remains. Only the ghost of their duty lingers, imprinted into the device itself, as though the bronze remembers the hand that last cared for it. It is this ghostly presence that we feel when we look upon the machine today. The gears are mute, yet they hum with memory. Their silence is thick with absence, and in that absence we sense the shadow of the last keeper. The tragedy is not only that their name was forgotten, but that it was never carved in the first place. The maker perhaps left no signature, the keeper certainly left no trace, and yet both live within the machine, their lives folded into the turns of bronze, invisible yet indelible. There is a paradox in this burden. To care for something designed to outlast you is to accept invisibility. The keeper knew they would vanish, but they also knew the object might not. To oil gears is to leave fingerprints that time will erase, but the smoothness of the gear itself remains, a trace of care without a name. Perhaps the keeper did not seek recognition. Perhaps their solace was in anonymity, in the quiet dignity of tending what others ignored. But we cannot help but wonder, in their final breath, did they feel pride or futility? Did they believe the machine would survive long enough for someone, anyone, to wonder again? We who stand centuries later are their answer. We wonder endlessly. Where construct, theorize, argue. In our curiosity we resurrect the shadow of the last keeper. Though we do not know their face, we know their burden, because the machine still breathes with it. They may have been forgotten, but they were not erased. Every mystery we wrestle with is a monument to them, silent but enduring. And perhaps this was always the point. Perhaps the keeper understood that immortality does not come from names, but from echoes. They knew they would die, but the machine would continue to echo their care. In that echo they live still, a ghost within bronze, a whisper within gears. The burden of being last is heavy, but it is not without grace. For to be the last is also to be the one who ensured that something survived at all. Thus, the keeper's burden is also their gift. We inherit their silence, their solitude, their unspoken prayers. We inherit the mystery they preserved at such cost. And though we cannot know their name, we feel the weight of their presence whenever we look upon the machine. The burden they bore in life becomes the awe we bear in their memory. They carried knowledge too fragile to pass on. We carry wonder too vast to measure. Between those two burdens, centuries stretch like a bridge, delicate yet enduring. In the end, the keeper is both tragic and triumphant. Tragic because they died alone, unseen, unremembered. Triumphant because their care allowed the machine to endure, allowed mystery itself to survive into our age. Their name is gone, but their shadow remains. And perhaps that is all any of us can hope for, that even when our names are forgotten, something of our care, our burden, our devotion will linger, quiet and eternal, in the world we leave behind. Civilizations do not vanish only in flame, nor do they fall only by the sword. Often they dissolve far more quietly, like mist in the morning sun. The most devastating collapse is not marked by walls tumbling or cities burning, but by memory slipping away. A library burns, and with it centuries of thought. A language fades, and with it the nuance of a worldview. A ritual is abandoned, and with it the wisdom of generations. It is forgetting, not war, that is the truest enemy of knowledge, and when forgetting takes hold, it is merciless. It does not ask permission. It creeps, it erodes, and it leaves behind artifacts as mute witnesses, objects filled with secrets no one remembers how to hear. The machine is such a witness. It endures, while the world that created it has long since fallen to dust. It sits in silence, bronze bones intact, but its language lost. To us it is a monument not only to invention, but also to the fragility of memory itself. Each gear, each wheel, each inscription that we cannot decipher is a reminder that brilliance is mortal if not renewed. What survives materially is often hollow without the continuity of thought that once animated it. A device may remain, but the minds that understood it are gone, and so it becomes a relic of sleep, a dream artifact from which we cannot wake. How much brilliance has humanity lost this way? How many sciences dissolved into soil? We look at the machine, and we are forced to confront the uncomfortable truth that it is only one fragment among countless others. Entire bodies of knowledge may have once existed with equal or greater refinement, but they have perished, dissolved not into fire but into silence. Consider the scrolls of Alexandria turned to ash, the tablets of forgotten cities ground down into clay dust, the oral traditions silenced when tongues no longer passed them on. We imagine progress as a steady climb, but in truth it is fragile, erratic, filled with collapses and relearnings. Every gain is temporary unless tended like flame. The machine then becomes a haunting symbol. It embodies both the heights of human thought and the peril of its neglect. We marvel at its intricacy, and yet we cannot replicate the exact intentions behind its design without guesswork. It is as though someone whispered a profound truth into the world, but the echo is all we hear. What secrets were locked within its turning gears? What destinies were once guided by its cycles? Did it predict eclipses, chart constellations, dictate rituals, or perhaps even serve as a tool of governance, aligning kings with the heavens? We cannot know, not fully. And that inability is not simply a matter of missing data. It is the embodiment of knowledge asleep, inaccessible, untouchable, waiting perhaps for a voice that will never return. When knowledge sleeps, it dreams. And those dreams are what we inherit. We stumble upon ruins and try to imagine the lives that built them. We hold fragments and wonder at the whole. We invent theories, craft reconstructions, and sometimes even manage to awaken a portion of what once was. But much of it remains locked away, not destroyed but dormant, like seeds without soil. The machine is such a seed, its brilliance intact, but its environment gone. Without the culture that understood it, without the language that named its gears, without the rituals that gave it context, it lies dormant. It sleeps within history, intact but mute. There is a peculiar cruelty in this kind of survival. To build something meant to endure and for it to last, but for the knowledge around it to vanish, is to ensure that endurance becomes silence rather than voice. The makers of the machine surely intended it to be used, consulted, revered. They may have imagined it guiding generations, its wisdom passed from father to son, priest to initiate, master to apprentice. And for a time, perhaps, it did. But once the chain of transmission snapped. The machine ceased to be a tool and became instead a puzzle. Its voice was silenced, its wisdom locked away, its brilliance reduced to mystery. And so the machine outlasts its culture, but not in the way its creators might have hoped. It has become a fossil of intellect, an artifact that shows us how fragile knowledge truly is. We live under the illusion that progress is permanent, that discovery once made is never lost. Yet here is proof that even the most intricate human achievements can vanish into obscurity. The machine whispers across centuries. Nothing is guaranteed, not even knowledge. This truth should unsettle us, for it forces us to look at our own age. We too believe that our sciences, our libraries, our archives are eternal. We imagine digital, storage as permanent, cloud servers as indestructible, institutions as immortal. But if civilizations can fall to silence before, why not again? Will future generations look back at us and find fragments of our brilliance, half understood, isolated, stripped of context? Will our own machines, once vital, become mute curiosities, relics of a knowledge that no one remembers how to read? The fragility of memory is not only a matter of physical preservation, but of continuity. A book unread is as dead as one burned. A ritual unpracticed is as forgotten as one erased. Knowledge requires not only storage, but living engagement. Without living minds to carry it forward, it lies dormant. That is the tragedy of forgetting. It is not always destruction, but dormancy, a slumber that may last forever. And yet, there is something hauntingly beautiful in this slumber. The machine, though asleep, still carries its secrets. It is a vessel of potential, a dream waiting for interpretation. Each scholar who approaches it, each curious mind that turns its fragments over, attempts to wake it. And though we may never fully succeed, the very act of trying creates new knowledge. Forgetting may silence the past, but it also challenges the present to rediscover, to imagine, to reconstruct. Still, the scale of loss cannot be ignored. The machine is a reminder that what we call human history is not a complete tapestry, but a torn fabric full of missing threads. Entire sciences may have flowered and died without leaving more than faint impressions. We look at the Antikythera mechanism and call it extraordinary, but perhaps it was not unique. Perhaps it was one of many, a common device in its time, as ordinary to them as a clock is to us. If so, then what we call wonder is actually ruin, the survival of a single fragment where once there was abundance. And if that is true, then the tragedy deepens, for the machine is not a solitary triumph, but a faint echo of a lost chorus. The sleep of knowledge humbles us. It reminds us that human achievement is not a steady ascent, but a fragile balancing act. Progress is not a staircase, but a cycle of flowering and withering, remembering and forgetting. Each age carries wisdom, but also risks losing it. Each culture contributes, but also leaves gaps. And through it all, memory is the most vulnerable thread, more delicate than bronze, more fragile than parchment, more perishable than stone. And so, we return to the machine sitting silently across centuries. It is more than metal. It is a mirror. In its silence, we see ourselves, our own precariousness. It is a warning that brilliance is never safe, that memory is never permanent, that even the greatest inventions can fall asleep and never wake. Yet it is also an invitation to tend our own knowledge with more care, to recognize that forgetting is the true enemy, and that to keep wisdom alive is a responsibility, not a given. When knowledge sleeps, it does not die. It waits. Sometimes, it waits forever, sometimes until someone reaches out to stir it. The machine has waited for us, and though we may never fully understand it, our attempt to listen keeps the dream alive. We awaken fragments, we glimpse possibilities, we feel the echo of its once living voice. In doing so, we honor not only the machine but all knowledge that sleeps, all wisdom lost and waiting. The bronze gears turn no longer, but their silence is loud. They remind us that we're custodians of memory, temporary keepers in a long chain that can easily be broken. The burden is ours now, to keep knowledge from sleeping too long, to tend it while we can, to pass it onward so that it may outlast us, not as mystery, but as living wisdom. The machine endured, but its meaning did not. May that be our lesson. When the chamber grows quiet, when the archaeologists set down their brushes and record books and walk away, when the lights are dimmed and silence returns, something intangible seems to stir. The machine rests as it always has. Bronze wheels. Frozen. Inscriptions faint. Fragments held in their protective cases. But there is a sense that stillness is not the same as absence. At night, when no human eyes are watching, it feels as though the machine dreams. Not in the way living creatures dream, but in the way memory does, carrying echoes of what once was, replaying the invisible patterns that once pulsed through its gears. Even in silence it remembers motion. Even in stillness it remembers rhythm. Its body of metal is inert, but its spirit lingers, as though some ghost of purpose refuses to vanish. If it dreams, what does it dream of? Perhaps it dreams of its makers. Perhaps within the bronze coils of its fragmented frame, it carries impressions of the hands that forged it, the eyes that studied the heavens and transcribed their cycles into cogs and dials. Perhaps it replays the care of the craftsman who filed each tooth precisely, the mathematician who calculated ratios of orbits, the priest or scholar who guided its design. When we stand before it today, we see only metal, but the machine, if it dreams, may see them still, its creators leaning over the workbench by lamplight, whispering among themselves about stars and gods, coaxing an idea into form. For us, those figures are long gone, dissolved into soil and forgotten lineages. For their machine, their memory may yet remain, not as names or faces, but as impressions etched into its being, as indelible as the grooves of its gears. Or perhaps it dreams not of the past but of us, we the strangers who gather in museums and laboratories, staring with awe at something we can half understand but never fully decode. We surround it with theories, we reconstruct it with modern tools, we argue endlessly about its purpose. But to the machine we are only passing visitors. Our lifetimes are brief compared to its endurance. To it we are flickering shadows that come and go, bearing new languages, new costumes, new technologies. In its dream, perhaps we're curious children, leaning close to hear a story whose words we cannot decipher. The machine may dream of our confusion, our wonder, our yearning to awaken it. In this way, its dream entangles us. We cannot look at it without becoming part of its story. Objects carry memory. We know this instinctively, even if science resists the idea. Statues remember the faces they were carved to honor, even when the names have been lost. Tools remember the hands that shaped them through the wear of grip, through the polish of use. A knife remembers every cut it ever made. A cup remembers every lip that touched it. The machine remembers motion. It remembers the cycle of gears turning. In precise harmony, remembers the rhythm of stars being mapped, remembers the purpose it once served with such clarity. It does not need to move for that memory to endure. Memory is not always active. It can rest like embers, glowing faintly, waiting for a breath to stir them. This is why the machine captivates us so deeply. It is not simply metal. It is memory crystallized. It is dream suspended in bronze. When we stand before it, we sense not only the ingenuity of its makers, but the persistence of something greater, the persistence of intention. It was built for a purpose, and though that purpose now escapes us, its essence lingers, refusing to fade. That is the dream of continuity, of survival, of being more than just matter. At night, when the chamber is quiet, perhaps the machine drifts into a dream of cycles. The gears turn in silence, not physically, but in imagination. The sun makes its slow journey across the zodiac. The moon waxes and wanes. Eclipses arrive with inevitability. The dream repeats itself endlessly, a rehearsal of celestial rhythm. For the machine was not only a tool, it was a model of eternity, a way of capturing in human hands the vast indifferent order of the heavens. In its dream, perhaps it continues this work, turning, forever keeping time even though no one listens. And in its dreaming it holds us captive, for we are drawn to its silence as if to an oracle. We know that it contains something we have lost. We know that its story is greater than ours, stretching across centuries, unconcerned with our brief lives. To encounter it is to be reminded that we are only visitors in the long story of time. The machine has endured through storms, shipwreck, burial, and rediscovery. It has witnessed empires collapse and new nations rise. Its dream is longer than any of our lives, longer than any dynasty, longer than any written record. And we, stepping into its presence for a short while, feel small in its shadow. Dreams in metal differ from dreams in flesh. Our dreams fade when we wake, vanishing with the morning sun. The machine's dream persists through centuries, unbroken by dawn, unshaken by silence. Its dream is not fragile but enduring. It does not dissolve but waits. And this perhaps is why we are haunted, because we sense that it carries within it a continuity that we, in our mortality, cannot match. We are dreamers who forget. It is a dream that remembers. The archaeologists who dust its surfaces, the engineers who reconstruct its missing gears, the historians who speculate about its meaning, all of them are drawn into its dream. They imagine themselves waking it, but in truth it is waking them. It is reminding us of the depths of human ingenuity, of the precariousness of memory, of the possibility that brilliance may outlast comprehension. Its dream is an invitation and a warning. It invites us to marvel, but it warns us of forgetting. For every machine that survives, countless others do not. For every dream in metal that lingers, there are 1,000 dreams lost to rust, to fire, to silence. And yet, there is comfort in its dreaming. To stand before it is to feel that not all is lost. The machine, though fractured, though silenced, though misunderstood, still endures. It still holds within it the potential for meaning. It still whispers across centuries, even if the words are faint. Its dream is not ours to own, but ours to glimpse, and in that glimpse we are reminded that human effort, though fragile, is never wholly in vain. Something always lingers. Some echo always persists. When knowledge sleeps, we said before, it does not die. Here in the dreaming of the machine we see that truth embodied. Its knowledge sleeps, but its dream endures. It carries use into reflections we might not otherwise face. About time, about loss, about what it means to build something meant to last. And though it cannot speak, though its makers are gone, though its purpose remains half-veiled, it still fulfills a role, not as a tool of prediction but as a teacher of humility. Dreams are not only for the dreamer, they ripple outward, touching others. The machine's dream has touched us, reshaping our understanding of ancient minds, unsettling our assumptions about linear progress, reminding us of how much we have forgotten. Each new visitor adds to the dream, weaving interpretations into its silence, expanding its story. In this way, the machine's dream is never finished. It grows with each pair of eyes that beholds it, each mind that wonders, each soul that lingers in its presence. Perhaps that is its final purpose, not only to map the heavens but to remind us across centuries that knowledge is fragile, memory is fleeting, but wonder endures. In wonder, the dream continues. In awe, the machine still speaks. We are its interpreters, its audience, its fleeting companions in the long night of history. And though we cannot fully awaken it, perhaps awakening was never the point. Perhaps the point was simply to dream together, for a moment across the abyss of time. The chamber falls silent. The archaeologists have gone. The lights are dimmed. And there, in the quiet, the machine dreams. Its gears turn insolence. Its cycles repeat. Its makers linger as shadows. It dreams of hands long gone and of eyes not yet born. It dreams of stars wheeling overhead, of destinies written in motion. It dreams of us, strangers who stand in awe, knowing we will pass, but it will remain. And in that dream, it binds us, not as masters of its knowledge, but as guests, in its eternal story. What happens when we too are gone? It is a question that follows like a shadow, subtle yet unshakable. We like to imagine permanence, skyscrapers scraping the clouds, satellites circling the earth, archives preserved in digital code. Yet history teaches otherwise. Every monument falls, every empire crumbles, every name once spoken with reverence dissolves into silence. One day our cities will lie in ruins, our machines will corrode, our words will fade into dust. And when that day comes, what if this ancient machine remains? What if, buried beneath the soil, resting in some forgotten chamber, it endures when all our wonders have vanished? Future archaeologists, whether human descendants or beings unlike us, may one day stumble upon it, brushing away layers of earth to find its familiar bronze gears. They will stand before it as we do now, filled with questions we can no longer answer. What would they make of us? The thought is humbling. They might marvel at our technology, holding fragments of silicon and rusted steel, puzzling over their function as we puzzle over bronze dials. They may wonder why we built cities so vast, why we launched machines into orbit, why we wrote in symbols that have since decayed into unrecognizable traces. They may look at our ruins and ask the same questions. We ask of the ancients, who were they? What did they know? What dreams drove their hands? Why with so much brilliance did they still fall into silence? The cycle of wonder would repeat, echoing across time. Just as we interrogate the past, so too would the future interrogate us. And at the center of that speculation, the ancient machine would remain. It would outlast both its makers and its interpreters, sitting in its patient silence, offering no answers except the mute testimony of endurance. It would become a double mystery, a relic of people long gone, interpreted by other people long gone, surviving into a future where both civilizations are forgotten. To those archaeologists of tomorrow, it would be less a tool than a mirror. They would not only study the machine itself, but also see reflected in it the impermanence of all who ever touched it. They would sense the fading of civilizations as inevitable, as the corrosion of metal. It is strange to think of an object, not alive, carrying a kind of immortality that we, with all our ambitions, cannot match. We craft machines to serve us, to extend our reach, to amplify our power. Yet when we vanish, some of those machines linger, stripped of purpose yet still present. They become monuments, not of our triumphs, but of our absence. The machine before us is exactly that, a survivor of both utility and meaning, lingering in a world where the questions outlive the answers. And in imagining its survival into futures beyond our own, we glimpse something even more unsettling, that we are not as permanent as the things we create. What would the future think of our knowledge? They might hold shards of glass from telescopes, or fragments of circuits from computers, and see in them a brilliance they half understand. But brilliance, once divorced from memory, becomes mystery. Just as we stare at this machine and cannot reconstruct the full scope of its maker's knowledge, so too may the future stare at us, and shake their heads at what we lost. They may ask how we, with our satellites and microscopes, allowed so much to slip away. They may see us as careless, as arrogant, as fleeting, and yet perhaps they will also see us as they see the machine's creators, as dreamers reaching beyond, ourselves trying to inscribe the heavens into metal, trying to leave a mark upon eternity. The irony is that the machine itself embodies this paradox. It was built to chart cycles that far outlast its makers, celestial rhythms of sun and moon, eclipse and star. Its purpose was to capture eternity in the language of gear and dial, and yet its very survival proves the opposite, that even tools of eternity fall silent, their meanings fractured, their purposes obscured. The future, looking at us, will see the same contradiction. We dream of permanence, yet all we leave are ruins. We build with faith in the future, yet the future inherits only fragments. And so, the machine becomes not only a relic of the past, but a prophecy of our fate. In its silence, it tells us that forgetting is inevitable. In its endurance, it shows us that survival does not equal understanding. In its presence, it warns us that one day, we too will become unknowable. The archaeologists, tomorrow will stand where we stand now, and they will wonder. They will reconstruct our fragments with theories and imagination, just as we reconstruct the machine. They will tell stories about us that may or may not be true, guided more by hope than by fact. And they will feel the same mixture of awe and sorrow. That brilliance could exist yet vanish into silence. There is something deeply human in this cycle of forgetting and rediscovery. We are storytellers, compelled to fill gaps, to make meaning out of fragments. The future will be no different. They will invent myths about us, perhaps glorifying our age as a golden era, or condemning it as reckless and blind. They may see in our ruins signs of wisdom we never claimed, or foolishness we never recognized. In either case, their image of us will be less about truth than about themselves. For when we interpret the past, we also reveal our own desires. When they interpret us, they will do the same. And through it all, the machine will sit indifferent, its bronze gears testifying only to endurance. It is tempting to believe that we might escape this fate, that we might preserve our knowledge more securely than those before us. We digitize, we archive, we imagine the permanence of data. Yet the truth is harsher. Data rots, languages shift, technologies decay. The archives of today are as fragile as papyrus, as vulnerable as clay tablets, as fleeting as ink. The future will inherit fragments at best. Our most advanced devices will corrode into puzzles as baffling as this machine. Our proudest monuments will erode into stones that inspire myths. In time, we too will be mysteries, and so when we look at the machine, we see not only the past, but the mirror of our own impermanence. Its silence is not only the silence of forgotten makers, but the silence that will one day surround us. It reminds us that knowledge is not enough to secure eternity, that invention is not enough to escape oblivion. What survives is not always what we intend. What endures is often what we least expect. Perhaps this realization is not a curse but a gift. To know that we are impermanent is to be reminded of urgency, of humility, of the preciousness of the present. We cannot guarantee that our works will survive, but we can live knowing that what we build, what we dream, what we love, carries weight, even if only for a moment. The machine has outlasted its makers, but what mattered to them was not that it would endure forever, but that it served its purpose in their time. So too with us. Our creations may crumble, but the act of creation itself carries meaning. The future may never know our names, but they will sense our presence in the fragments we leave. And perhaps that is enough. To be remembered perfectly is impossible. To be remembered at all is rare. But to have touched the fabric of time, even briefly, is to have mattered. The machine reminds us of this. Its makers are gone, their names dissolved, their knowledge fractured, yet we still feel their presence when we touch its corroded surface. We sense their dreams when we trace the arcs of its gears. They live on not as individuals but as echoes, and one day perhaps we too will be echoes. So what happens when we are gone? The truth is simple. The world will continue. The stars will move in their cycles, the tides will rise and fall, The seasons will turn. Our cities will crumble. Our machines will rust. Our names will be forgotten. But perhaps, somewhere in the soil, the machine will remain, dreaming its long dream. And future. Eyes will gaze upon it just as we do now and wonder. And in their wondering we will live again, not as we were, but as stories, as mysteries, as fragments of a long and unfinished dream. The future that waits is not ours to shape entirely, but it is ours to glimpse. And in the quiet ticking of imagination, we hear the same truth that the machine whispers in its silence. Nothing lasts forever, yet nothing is wholly lost. Every gear, every fragment, every ruin carries a memory. And memory, though fractured, is still alive. The chamber grows quieter with each passing year. Dust gathers in the corners, moisture drips from stone to stone, and faint echoes carry through the hollow spaces. Yet at the center, the machine endures. Where once archaeologists gathered in excitement, where once bright lights and eager voices disturbed the stillness, now there is only the return of silence. The years have reclaimed the chamber, but the machine resists. Its bronze carries the weight of centuries, its gears still ready to move, when coaxed by careful hands. Even untouched, it radiates a strange persistence as though its very existence were an act of defiance against time. Visitors who approach it today do so with reverence. No sign commands silence, yet instinct stills the voice. Some enter with the awe of pilgrims approaching a shrine. Others come as skeptics, determined to see only a relic of engineering, a curiosity of history. But even the skeptics often falter. They pause, hesitate, and whisper to one another as though afraid to disturb the rhythm of something greater than themselves. In the machine's presence, the human impulse is not to explain but to respect. It demands nothing, yet it grants no release from its mystery. Some scholars still argue that it is a remnant of forgotten science, a demonstration of knowledge that was once held and then lost. They point to the precision of the gears, the uncanny alignment, the mathematical elegance hidden in bronze. Others insist it is not science, but ritual, a device created not to measure, but to honor, not to predict but pray. There are even those who suggest it was never meant for human use at all, that it is an artifact of contact, a fragment of knowledge from a source beyond the scope of history. Each theory circles endlessly, none with final proof. For all the effort poured into deciphering its workings, the machine remains closed. The act of turning its gears feels less like manipulation and more like invocation. A hand upon its wheel is not the hand of a mechanic, but of a supplicant. The gears shift, hesitate, and then continue, slow but precise. In that moment, something passes between the observer and the object. Centuries collapse. The distance between maker and inheritor, between past and present, dissolves. It is not metal one touches, but memory itself. Not weight, but time-given form. And yet when the hand is withdrawn, no answers remain. The machine does not explain itself. It turns, and in turning, it denies finality. This denial is what unsettles, as much as it fascinates. Most relics of antiquity can be categorized. This was a weapon, this was a vessel, this was a temple. But the machine refuses such closure. Each explanation is possible, but none is complete. It resists the hunger for certainty that defines modern study. In this resistance, it becomes less an object of knowledge and more a mirror. Those who gaze upon it see themselves reflected, their longing for order, their fear of forgetting, their need for permanence. The machine has become a stage upon which humanity projects its questions, its doubts, its hope that meaning endures. There are those who see in it proof of genius lost. If ancient minds could produce such precision, then history is not a steady march of progress, but a series of rises and falls. Perhaps the ancients touched truths we have yet to rediscover. Others look upon it and feel dread, for it suggests that knowledge is not only fragile but easily erased. If such brilliance could vanish once, it can vanish again. Our own machines, our vast networks of data, our satellites orbiting Earth, are they not equally vulnerable? Fire, flood, war, neglect, all can undo centuries in days. In the bronze gears lies not only wonder, but warning. Still, others see beauty. They marvel at its endurance, its elegance, its quiet defiance of decay. To them, the machine is a poem written in metal, a rhythm of turning that outlasts its creators. Its silence is not emptiness, but fullness, a reminder that not all meaning must be spoken. It speaks without words, teaches without explanation. For some, this is enough. To sit in its presence is to feel connected, however faintly, to the long thread of human striving, to the dream that knowledge can touch eternity. Yet there are always those who leave unsettled. They sense not beauty, but unease, a presence too alive. To be inert, the machine feels less like a relic and more like a watcher. It does not speak, but it observes. It does not command, but it expects acknowledgement. To some, this weight is suffocating. They leave quickly, unwilling to remain in the company of something that seems to breathe when it should not, that seems to remember when it should forget. What endures most is the impression it leaves upon all who see it, that it will outlast them. Generations may pass, nations may crumble, languages may vanish, but the machine will remain. Its gears will resist corrosion, its frame will hold against the shifting earth. When all else has dissolved into dust, it will still be there, waiting. The thought is humbling, even terrifying, that the future will inherit it as surely as the past abandoned it. We become part of a chain, not by choice, but by inevitability. The machine does not need us, yet it binds us to itself simply by enduring. Perhaps in this lies its true purpose, not as a tool, not as a weapon, not even as a calendar. It is a reminder that we are small, that our knowledge is fragile, that mystery is eternal. Each age believes itself enlightened, each civilization imagines its wisdom permanent. Yet the machine stands as evidence to the contrary. There were those before us who knew, who built, who dreamed, and we cannot recover their full vision. So, too will those after us look upon our ruins and wonder, and they too will fail to recover the whole of what we leave behind. Imagine then the chamber centuries hence. Our own cities lie in ruin, our machines corroded, our names dissolved into dust. The world has shifted, new peoples walk the earth, and still the machine waits. Future archaeologists, not of our kind, uncover it once more. They will ask who we were, what we knew, why we built, and why we forgot. The machine will offer no answer, only the slow turning of its gears. It will reflect their questions back to them, just as it reflects ours now. And so the cycle continues. Past, present, and future all collapse in its silence. The machine without end is not only an artifact but a meditation, a mirror in which humanity confronts its own impermanence. We look to it for knowledge, but what it gives us instead is perspective. We are not eternal. Our truths are not final. Our machines, our libraries, our monuments, each will pass. What remains is not certainty, but the enduring presence of mystery. As the last light fades from the chamber, as silence reclaims the stones, the gears endure, indifferent and unbroken. They do not rush, they do not age, they wait as they always have, as they always will, without end. The story of the machine ends where it began, in silence. The chamber returns to its stillness. The dust resumes its patient settling, and the drip of water echoes softly in the stone. Yet something lingers long after the visitor departs. The machine, indifferent to our questions, has woven itself into the imagination. Its wheels may turn only when coaxed, but the thought of it continues to move within us, a rhythm of mystery that does not cease. We close the doors behind us, but the image of bronze against shadow endures in the mind's eye, a presence that cannot be dismissed. From the beginning, our fascination has not been with the machine itself, but with what it reflects. We came seeking answers, to know who built it, what it measured, why it was hidden, and what purpose it served. And yet at each step, the gears resisted. They turned without yielding their truth. They invited interpretation, but withheld certainty. In this refusal, the machine gave us something deeper than knowledge. It gave us humility. It reminded us that we are not the first to wonder, nor will we be the last. We inherit the unanswered questions of the past, and we pass them on to the future, each generation touching the wheel but never holding it still. Perhaps this is the true genius of the machine, not in its construction, remarkable though it is, but in its endurance as a riddle. A solved mystery fades into history, catalogued and filed away. But an unsolved mystery endures. It continues to breathe, to inspire, to unsettle. The machine has become less an artifact and more a companion to our imagination. It has outlasted empires, outlasted languages, and it will outlast us too. Its silence is its power, for silence leaves space for us to speak into it, to pour our fears, our hopes, and our wonder into its turning gears. Consider how many generations have already stood before it, scholars who traced its teeth with trembling fingers, pilgrims who whispered prayers to it as though it were an altar, dreamers who saw in it not a tool but a metaphor for time itself. Each left with a story to tell, and yet their machine remained unchanged. Their words dissolved, their names forgotten, but the machine continued. It is, in this sense, not merely without end. It is beyond ownership. It does not belong to the past, nor to us nor to the future. It belongs only to itself. And what of us standing now in its shadow? We too are temporary. We too will fade. Our towers, our satellites, our vast networks of knowledge, all will crumble in the span of centuries. What survives will not be the totality of our brilliance, but fragments. Perhaps a book sealed in a vault, perhaps a monument hidden beneath earth, perhaps a machine buried and waiting. The future will inherit our fragments as we inherited those of the past. They will look upon what remains of us and wonder, who were these people? What did they know? Why did they forget? And just as the machine refuses to answer us, so too will our relics remain silent. In this, the machine is not only a mirror but a prophecy. It shows us what becomes of all human creation. No matter how advanced, no matter how purposeful, everything we make will eventually escape our grasp. It will persist beyond us, stripped of context, awaiting new eyes to interpret it. Our works will outlive our intentions, and their meanings will shift with time. The machine teaches us that impermanence is not failure, but the natural state of things. Mystery is not an obstacle, but the final gift of time. And yet, within this sobering truth lies a quiet comfort. For if nothing endures whole, if all knowledge fades, then what matters most is not the permanence of answers, but the persistence of seeking. We are bound to the chain of wonder that stretches across generations. The builders wondered as they forged the gears. The archaeologists wondered as they unearthed them. We wonder as we gaze upon their turning. The future will wonder as they inherit what we leave behind. The chain does not break. It extends endlessly, each link forged not of certainty, but of curiosity. This is why The Machine matters, not because it explains the past, but because it reminds us that the act of questioning is eternal. To be human is not to know everything, but to stand before the unknown and refuse to look away. The machine in its silence teaches us how to endure that uncertainty with reverence instead of despair. It whispers, not with words but with motion, that mystery itself is the heartbeat of history. So let us leave the chamber now. Let us close the heavy doors, extinguish the light, and walk once more into the world above. Yet let us carry with us what the machine has given. Not an answer, but a question. Not certainty, but wonder. Let us remember that we too are fleeting, that our creations too will one day be relics, that silence will claim us as surely as it claims the past. But let us also remember that within this silence lives continuity, that even when our names are forgotten, the act of wonder continues. The machine turns, slow and precise, unbroken by time. It does not end because it does not need to. It waits as it always has, as it always will. And in its waiting it teaches us the most profound lesson of all, that to live is to participate in the mystery, to leave behind fragments for others to find, to be part of the endless conversation between what was, what is, and what will be. The machine endures, but so does wonder, and perhaps in the end they are one and the same.